Spoilers for Lies of P. It felt to me like a lot of the hype surrounding Lies of P pre-release, or at least pre-demo, was more than a little poisoned by irony. The premise, on the face of it, sounds absurd. Pinocchio Souls. Taking a children's book from 1883 and turning it into a dark, violent, and of course, difficult action game about fighting robots in late 19th century France. Lies of P plays well. If you strip away all of the narrative trappings, it's a tremendous game. That premise could have been a stunt, an out-of-left-field hook to get eyes on the game, and I believe it would have been successful on the merits of its gameplay alone. I think what's most impressive about the execution of Lies of P, though, is that there's not a trace of irony in the game itself. It is committed to its premise, to being Pinocchio Souls, and it's not going to wink wink nudge nudge tell you that it knows the premise is absurd, because instead it's going to convince you that the premise makes perfect sense. What's more, its existence as a video game is not as weird of a fit as it might initially seem. I think the format of The Adventures of Pinocchio actually makes a lot of sense for this kind of video game adaptation. The story was originally serialized in Italian magazines over the course of 1881 and 1882 before being printed altogether as a novel in 1883. Because of that serialized origin, the story of Pinocchio is largely episodic, a series of vignettes that lend themselves well to being adapted into individual levels in the context of a game. In this video, I want to talk about what's going on in Lies of P. This is in large part a lore video where I'm going to explain the connections between characters and plot elements because I think it's neat and I like it a lot, and I think in true Soulsborne fashion, if you're willing to look for how all of the pieces fit together, you will find that those answers are there, they are surprising, and they are interesting. If you're just here for a lore video, you will find that here. But beyond that, I also want to ask the question, why Pinocchio? Make no mistake, Lies of P's connections to Pinocchio are more than skin deep. It may not look it at a glance, but this is a surprisingly thoughtful and respectful adaptation of Carlo Collodi's original novel. But why? Why did Lies of P feel the need to be as explicit in this adaptation as it is, not just alluding to characters and ideas from the novel, but directly taking them? How does Lies of P adapt the elements of the original novel, and what is it using the pieces it takes and those it invents whole cloth to say? Pinocchio is, inarguably, a great and enduring piece of literature. It's also a widely misunderstood and misrepresented one in adaptations. The actual theme, above all else, important to the original novel, is one about the importance of education. It was written in a changing landscape of Italian culture, and largely serves to advocate for and impress upon children the importance of education. Keep in mind, this is Italy in the 1880s, so when I say the importance of education, here that's referring to things like being able to read and write and do arithmetic, not exclusively what we think of as higher education now. Take, for example, the symbolism of the donkey within Pinocchio. When Pinocchio and his friend Lampwick go to the land of toys and spend 5 months wasting the days away instead of studying, they find themselves turned into donkeys and sold into hard labor. Throughout the whole story, Pinocchio's defining characteristic is not dishonesty, although that is true of him as well. It is a profound laziness, always seeking the easiest way to the easiest life. Eventually, this leads him to a life as a donkey, being whipped and tortured into performing at a traveling circus. What Collodi is saying here is that children who don't apply themselves in school, children who don't study and learn to work with their brains, can only hope to live their lives as a beast of burden. Children who behave like jackasses will be forced to live like jackasses. More to the point, the symbolism of Pinocchio being a puppet who turns into a human through diligent studying reinforces this idea that education is important. If you aren't educated, you can't hope to be more than a puppet, your strings being pulled by those smarter and more well-informed than you are. These themes of education don't often make it into adaptations, or at least don't make it into adaptations as the primary theme. They're grandfathered in by virtue of adapting the original source material, but rarely, if ever, are they the focus. The most well-known adaptation, one which has completely usurped the original novel in the public consciousness, at least in the English-speaking world, Disney's 1940 adaptation, does feature Pinocchio failing to go to school, but the overall theme of the story is turned into a much simpler morality tale, mostly about children obeying their parents. The Land of Toys is changed from a place exclusively about laziness to Pleasure Island, a place where people drink and gamble. While Pinocchio does still skip school, the moral is much less about education and more about children needing to behave and mind their elders in general. I think that's a shame because the original text is more nuanced in what it says here. It does not preach that children should listen to their elders unquestioningly, but instead that they should listen to those who know more than they do. Again, reinforcing the theme of education. Sometimes in the novel, elders and even those in positions of power are portrayed as comically inept or foolish, a bit of biting satire by Collodi. In specific, the gorilla judge in the town of Catchfools is a cautionary tale against assuming someone is wise just because they are old. The judge is described as a big ape of the gorilla species, a big old ape respected because of his honorable age, his white beard, and particularly his gold-rimmed glasses, which had no lenses and which he was forced to wear at all times because of an eye inflammation that had been tormenting him for years. Again, the message Collodi is sending here is pretty clear. The gorilla judge has the appearance of age and of intelligence, but is in fact just a big dumb ape that people elevated to power because of his glasses. My point here isn't to slam the Disney film. There's a lot to like about it. The animation remains gorgeous, and adapting a work by necessity requires making changes to it and reinterpreting it. Lies of P, as we'll see, also takes the core of the original story in a different direction. That's okay. I will admit that overall, I find the Disney version of the story less compelling than either the novel or many other adaptations, but that is just a matter of personal taste. Other adaptations, like AI, Artificial Intelligence, or Guillermo del Toro's wonderful 2022 stop-motion film, by far my favorite film adaptation, use the story as a case study for the human condition, and more specifically, mortality. Can a puppet, an object made of wood, or, in the case of AI, metal, undying and eternal, even understand what being human means? Is mortality so important to the human condition that it is impossible to be human without one day dying? While mortality is something which the original novel explores, it is not the primary theme, and it's usually in other characters' relation to it, not Pinocchio. But Pinocchio and his journey to become a real boy functions so strongly as a metaphor for the human experience that it works very well as a framework to explore these ideas. That is, I think, one of the reasons that Pinocchio, as a character, has been so enduring. The original novel is fascinating and a great piece of literature, but the character is such a powerful metaphor for being human that you can use him to explore almost any aspect of humanity. And it's here where we transition back to talking about Lies of P. The story of Pinocchio is fundamental to this game, and the game would not be as strong if it presented itself as a wholly original work. As much as Public Domain Souls sounds like a shitpost, the creators of this game knew what they were doing. The game uses the characters and themes of the book in such a way that you can tell the creators ask themselves why the story of Pinocchio has been so enduring, why it has resonated with so many generations of people in entirely different parts of the world, and have used some more modern tropes to bring a new interpretation of the story of Pinocchio to a modern audience. Lies of P isn't a story about education. It's not really here to explore the main themes of the original novel, and it's also not really about mortality, even though there is a subplot set up about immortality that we'll get to in a bit. It's also not a morality tale about the dangers of lying or about listening to your elders, and, in fact, it refutes both of these ideas. It's not hard to imagine a lesser version of this game, where the lying system worked out to a simple good and bad karma meter, like was in fashion in games in the late aughts and early tens, where you got the good ending by always telling the truth, and the bad ending by always lying. Instead, Lies of P turns that on its head to tell a story that's actually about lying, about why we lie, and about how lying makes us human. How it's not always a bad thing, and all the different ways we lie and what they mean. That's an interesting idea, and they use it to tell an interesting story, one that the framework of Pinocchio is uniquely suited to helping them tell. That is why this story had to be about Pinocchio. Before we get into the meat of the video, I want to briefly shout out this 2021 Penguin Classics printing of The Adventures of Pinocchio, which was edited and annotated by John Hooper and Anna Krajina. The historical context provided by these annotations was immensely helpful and informative for the purposes of this video, and you can get a copy of this printing for around $8. So if the spirit moves you to read the original 1883 novel after watching this video, I highly recommend that version. I'll be referring to the notes within this translation throughout the video, and anytime I quote a passage from the book, it's also coming from this specific translation. On the note of translation, The Adventures of Pinocchio is a text that's been translated and retranslated from Italian into English, and that means it's very difficult to know what proper nouns to use when referring to almost anything. For example, the sea monster that swallows Pinocchio near the end of the story is called Il terribile pescacane in Italian, which literally translates to the terrible dogfish, and it is this name that, from what I can tell, most translations of the book go with. However, pescacane, while literally translating to dogfish, is actually the Italian word for shark, and so it is more accurate to call the monster the terrible shark, which is indeed what the translation I'm quoting from in this video, the aforementioned 2021 Penguin Classics printing, goes with. Overall, I've decided to err on the side of, from what I can tell, are the most widely used translations. So I will be calling it the terrible dogfish in this video, and I'll be saying Catchfools instead of Catch-Dupsburg, and so on. Basically, with a few exceptions, I'm pulling from the names used in the Wikipedia article for The Adventures of Pinocchio because I think it's reasonable to assume that the names used in the Wikipedia article are going to be the most widely recognized due to Wikipedia's ubiquity as an online information source. Lies of P also borrows heavily from the Disney movie, for example, using the character of Jiminy Cricket as inspiration for the character of Gemini, pronounced Gemini, instead of the talking cricket of the book, who is an extremely minor character only appearing in a handful of scenes. Because of that, sometimes I'll also be referring to the names used in the Disney movie, Pleasure Island, Monstro, and so on. So if you catch me being inconsistent, now you know my reasoning. Now, without further ado, let's get into the story of Lies of P. At the beginning of Lies of P, you awaken on a train in Krat Central Station, brought to life by a blue butterfly with a voice that speaks to you. I'm going to call the player character in this game just P in order to differentiate him from the main character of the original story, but the game actually never directly names him. Instead, characters just call him Puppet of Geppetto, so if you want to call him George or something in your head, you have my permission. The voice speaking to you through the butterfly belongs to a woman named Sophia, our stand-in for the Blue Fairy. Sophia is an ethereal presence throughout the game. In Souls-like terms, she is our level-up lady. She's our maiden in black, or our doll, or our shrine maiden. The character she's actually the most similar to is Dark Souls 2's Emerald Herald, as the version of Sophia we see throughout most of the game is not her true body, rather a spectral projection she's using to speak to us. Sophia has special powers, not only able to use Ergo, the game's equivalent to Souls, to level us up, but also the limited ability to manipulate time. This is how the game justifies bringing P back every time we die, with Sophia literally turning the clock back a few moments to the last time we rested at a stargazer. Sophia is the daughter of Valentinus Monad, a man seen as the founder of modern Krat, and the leader of the Alchemists, a powerful group who serve as the leaders of the city. Krat was once just a simple fishing village until, 30 years before the events of the game, Valentinus and the Alchemists discovered a unique mineral called crowd beneath the city, implied to have fallen to the earth as a meteorite thousands of years earlier. Crowd was able to be refined into a crystallized form called Ergo, an incredibly potent power source responsible for pretty much everything else that happens in the game. The city of Krat we see is far from its modest roots. In just 3 decades, it has grown into a technically advanced city inspired by the French Belle Epoque era. This was a late 1800s Industrial Revolution era for France, viewed as a golden age of prosperity, culture, and technological innovation. With Ergo, the alchemists were able to rapidly turn Krat into a wonder of the world, an industrialized marvel known above all for its signature industry, puppets. Walking marionettes invented by Giuseppe Geppetto, powered by Ergo. These robotic servants become integrated into every aspect of daily life in Krat, and helped the city thrive. P himself is Geppetto's special puppet. Unlike all of the other puppets in Krat, who are clearly mechanical, P is advanced enough to appear human. More importantly, all of the puppets in Krat are bound by the Grand Covenant, a set of Asimov-styled laws of robotics, which include the inability to lie. All of the puppets except for P, that is. When you awaken, the city of Krat is under siege. The city now finds itself in the midst of 2 crises. The first to hit is a mysterious plague which threatens to eradicate the city, called the Petrification Disease. This disease literally turns people to stone and has spread throughout the entire city. While this plague was going on, however, a second disaster struck called the Puppet Frenzy. All of the puppets throughout the city suddenly went on violent rampages, killing everyone in their path, all seemingly led by a mysterious character calling himself the King of Puppets. Sophia calls you to the Hotel Krat, saying that you are the only one who can save Krat and her from these forces threatening it, and provides you with a lamp that used to belong to her containing a mechanical talking cricket, Gemini, who will be a constant companion to P throughout the game, and who once served a similar role for Sophia herself. The game's version of the talking cricket as a constant companion to P is much more similar to the Disney version of the character than the original text. In the novel, the talking cricket, who is never named, appears to lecture Pinocchio early on, and in response, Pinocchio throws a hammer at him, killing him instantly. The spirit of the talking cricket does appear later on, but does not serve as a constant conscience to Pinocchio. If anything, the motif of the talking cricket being a pest species, known for its incessant noise, droning on and on, is a bit of satire by Collodi, likening the endless lectures of the old to the young to the pointless noise of a cricket. Lies of P's version of the character being given to the player by Sophia clearly mirrors the Disney film, where Jiminy is given the task of being Pinocchio's conscience by the Blue Fairy. Here, thankfully, he is more companion and less conscience. He He doesn't serve to lecture P on what he should do, but to comment on the difficult situations the pair find themselves in, remind the player what the character's goal is, and provide a gentle guide through the game. Gemini is portrayed more affable and sympathetic than the talking cricket, but his constant quipping as if he's out of a Marvel movie does feel like it is designed to get on both the players' and P's nerves.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilgrim's Cable Railway. Now, those of you who joined us in Moonlight Town, we hope your preparations for the Pilgrim's Journey are well underway. Fascinating town, Moonlight, just fascinating. Back in the day, the only way to reach the cathedral was using a rope and pulley. So, thanks for building it on a cliff, St. Frangelico. I kid. Frangelico, wonderful saint, wonderful. Anyway, next stop, the Bridge of Atonement. While you atone there, don't miss a magnificent view of beautiful Krat. It's been my pleasure, friends, and enjoy the rest of your journey. I've been your captain on this ride, Gemini! Well, not bad, huh? Oh, I really am good at this. When in doubt, let Gemini be your guide. You look annoyed. What'd I do?
I've seen some people really hate Gemini's quips for feeling forced and tedious, especially with how serious the tone of the game otherwise is. I agree with this. I think Gemini's quips can be pretty grating and terrible, but I think it's on purpose. His role in the novel is to be an annoyance to Pinocchio, and so in my opinion, the talking cricket is one of the few characters where they can get away with that, and where it's a feature, not a bug. Before we get into the deeper connections and really comb through the lore of Lies of P, I think it makes sense to go through some of the more surface-level stuff. Names that are borrowed, but adapted into characters who barely resemble those they are named after. As Krat fell to the puppet frenzy, it became the playground of the Stalkers, a mercenary force who were prominent in Krat before the fall, and who now have more or less free reign of the city to do whatever they want through force. All of the Stalkers wear unique animal masks, and are generally referred to by the name of the animal whose mask they wear. A lot of these Stalkers serve as mini-bosses. Think the hunter fights from Bloodborne. In the book, Pinocchio meets many different talking animals throughout the story, and so the Stalkers served as a way to fold a lot of these characters into the game. Let's lightning round through some of the more minor ones. The first Stalker you meet is the Mad Donkey, which, as we've already discussed, is an animal referenced throughout the book. The Owl Doctor, met in the Barren Swamp, has gone insane as the city fell, and is trying to kill his patients to spare them from a worse fate. When he realizes that P has no vital signs, he decides P must be dead already, and attacks him to get him to stop moving around and act like the dead should. This is a reference to an owl doctor summoned by the Blue Fairy in chapter 16 of the book, alongside a crow doctor and the ghost of the talking cricket, who she asks to determine whether Pinocchio is alive or dead after he's been hung by some murderers. The owl and the crow are both comically inept, as the crow concludes that Pinocchio is dead, unless by some chance he turned out to be alive, and the owl concludes that Pinocchio is alive, unless by some chance he turned out to be dead. This is another cautionary tale against those in positions of power who don't know what they're talking about. Only the talking cricket has the courage to admit he doesn't know. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood are also references to this section of the book, as the Blue Fairy calls a group of Undertaker rabbits to take Pinocchio away when he refuses to take some medicine a few paragraphs later. In the game, the Black Rabbit Brotherhood are a feared, legendary group of stalkers who have now taken control of an entire district of Krat, where they do whatever they wish. They serve as the main bosses of chapters 5 and 10 of the game. The robber weasel you meet upon your return to Krat Central Station late in the game references chapter 22 of the book, where Pinocchio is forced to serve as a replacement guard dog for a farmer and protect his chickens from a group of weasels that come to steal them in the night. The stalker named just Survivor, who you meet in Vanini Works, is a reference to the marmot who diagnoses Pinocchio with donkey fever. In other words, tells him that he's transforming into a donkey in chapter 32 of the book. In many translations, the marmot is instead a dormouse, which is why the survivor wears a mouse mask. The White Lady, who serves as a mini-boss at Rosa Isabelle Street, references a pigeon who informs Pinocchio that the Blue Fairy has died after she believes Pinocchio has abandoned her when he is sent to prison for several months by the gorilla judge in chapter 23 of the book. There are characters other than stalkers, even major characters, whose connections to the book are pretty surface level. A lot of names are taken, but are otherwise unrecognizable. Perhaps the strangest of all of these to me is Eugenie, whose name is the feminine version of Eugene, one of Pinocchio's classmates who is injured when a group of kids are trying to torment Pinocchio by throwing textbooks at him in chapter 27 of the book. She has nothing to do with the character from the book except the name. She's your blacksmith. She's one of a couple characters from the Far East, implied to be Japan or whatever its analog in this world is. The other major character from the Far East is Alidoro, your boss weapon merchant, although the Alidoro we meet in the game ends up being an imposter who killed the real Alidoro. In the book, Alidoro is a mastiff who is sent to hunt down Pinocchio when he is framed for injuring Eugene by the other boys. Another character adapted in name only is Medoro. In the game, Medoro is an investigative journalist breaking stories about what's really going on in Krat, whose articles you can find for important lore throughout the game, and who is implied to have been mutated into a terrible monster deep within the barren swamp level. In the book, Medoro is the name of a poodle who serves as the Blue Fairy's coachman, and only appears in a single chapter of the book. As many of the stalkers reference characters from the book, so too do many of the named puppets we meet throughout the game, including bosses. The character of Mangiafuoco, which literally translates to Fire Eater, is sort of double adapted within the game. In the book, Mangiafuoco is the operator of a puppet theater which Pinocchio ends up visiting early on. The physical description of Mangiafuoco is pretty directly adapted as the first main boss of the game, the Parade Master, while his name and association with fire is adapted as the game's third main boss, King's Flame Fuoco. The puppets within Mangiafuoco's theater, Pulcinella and Arlecchino, also get their names taken, with Pulcinella serving as the butler of the great inventor Vanini, who ends up being one of your greatest allies in the game, and Arlecchino, whose name literally translates to English as Harlequin, is adapted into Arlecchino, King of Riddles. Because if you haven't played the game, it doesn't seem like this would be true, but Lies of P is a game where sometimes the Riddler calls you, like it's Batman Arkham Asylum.
It's time for the riddle. No more waiting. We thank you for participating.
Speaking of Vanini, although he is an invented character for the game without a direct analog in the original story, his first name, Lorenzini, is a reference to Carlo Collodi's real name, Carlo Lorenzini, with Collodi being a pen name. His last name is also potentially a reference to actor Roberto Benigni, a notable fan of Pinocchio who both directed and starred in the 2002 live-action adaptation, which is one of the few movies with the dubious honor of sitting at a solid 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Polendina, the main merchant at Hotel Krat and the servant of Lady Antonia, also has his name taken from the book. In this case, Polendina is a mean nickname the children of the town have given Geppetto, translating to something along the lines of Yellow Wig. Lady Antonia's name is taken from Master Antonio, the carpenter who initially finds a talking log and gives it to his friend Geppetto to make into a puppet. Antonia is said to be a longtime friend of Geppetto, and so the parallel is actually pretty strong here. But Antonia ends up having a greater role in the game than Antonio does in the book, where he disappears after the first few chapters. In the game, Antonia is also described as having the scent of cherries, which is a reference to Master Antonio's nickname, Mr. Cherry. Giangio, who we'll talk about later on, has his name taken from the farmer who buys Pinocchio's friend Lampwick after they are turned into donkeys. As another bit of miscellany connected to the book, if you haven't played Lies of P, I suspect one of the big questions on your lips is, does his nose grow when he lies? No. But there is a portrait of him whose nose does grow when he gains humanity, which is largely done by lying. If you get it to grow all the way out, you can break it off of the portrait to become the game's ultimate weapon, the Golden Lie, a bow staff with a completely unique moveset. I don't have anything else to say about that, other than that it's hilarious. Once you beat the Parade Master, you end up in Hotel Krat, which serves as your Firelink Shrine, your main hub for the game. Once there, Sophia directs you to go save Geppetto, who is in danger, and so you adventure through the streets of Krat until you find him under siege from the Mad Donkey. After defeating the donkey, you meet the game's version of Pinocchio's father, Giuseppe Geppetto. This is where you get set on, really, the first main goal of the game, to stop the puppet frenzy and defeat the King of Puppets, now that P finds himself under the guidance of Geppetto. First, he sends you to Vanini Works, where the puppets are being manufactured, then to the older parts of Krat that have been mostly forgotten, and so on through a series of levels that function as references to specific sections of the book. So now that we've got a lot of the basics out of the way, what the basic premise of Lies of P is, and some of the more surface level references to the book, I want to dial in on specific elements and specific levels, what the story of these elements are within Lies of P, and how that compares to what they reference from The Adventures of Pinocchio. The first of these, which I want to explore, is the role of the cat, the fox, and the gold coin fruit. If The Adventures of Pinocchio can be said to have villains, then in the original run of serials, consisting of the first 15 chapters, the main villains would be the fox and the cat. After Pinocchio sells his spelling book to attend Mangiafuoco's puppet theater, he nearly finds himself used as the man's firewood to cook his dinner. Ultimately, though, he talks his way into Mangiafuoco's good graces, and the man not only lets Pinocchio free, but sends him on his way with 5 gold coins to take back to his father. Extreme poverty is another major theme of the book, and these 5 gold coins would be a life-changing amount of money. On his way home, though, he encounters a fox and a cat, 2 clever but sinister creatures who live by conning innocent folks out of their money. Upon learning that Pinocchio has 5 gold coins, they decide to con him out of his money. The fox pretends to have a limp, and the cat pretends to be blind, and both tell Pinocchio that these afflictions have, somehow, been the result of excessive studying, in order to convince Pinocchio that their get-rich-quick scheme is a better option than going home to Geppetto and applying himself in school. They tell him a story of the Field of Miracles, a magical place where gold coins, once buried, will grow into a beautiful tree, returning your money 500 times over. They tell him that, should he follow them to the Field of Miracles, he can turn his 5 gold coins into 2,500 gold coins, enough to make him a fine gentleman. Instead, they first end up taking him to the Red Lobster Inn, famed for their Cheddar Bay biscuits, where they order a massive amount of food and stick Pinocchio with the bill. Next, they disguise themselves as murderers and attack Pinocchio, first trying to get the remaining coins from him, and then hanging him when he won't give the coins up. This is the grisly end of the original serials, with Pinocchio being killed by the fox and the cat, before the story's continuation introduced the Blue Fairy to rescue him. Finally, later on, the fox and the cat lead Pinocchio to a place they call the Field of Miracles, help him bury the remaining coins, and tell him to leave for 20 minutes so the tree can grow. When he does so, they of course take the coins and escape. In Lies of P, the fox and the cat are adapted, like many of the animal characters from the book, as stalkers, called Red Fox and Black Cat. You first meet them in Vanini Works, where they've left Vanini out to dry, abandoning him within the dangerous factory. Red Fox and Black Cat are the closest thing Lies of P has to a Patches-type character, as they are constantly misleading you, betraying you, or otherwise attempting to swindle you out of money. The first time you meet them, the cat will sell you what he purports to be a copy of Vanini's Krat Landmark Guide, a series of collectibles giving you lore about the city that you've already encountered a few volumes of up to now. If you pay the 500 ergo, you discover that what he actually sells you is a ripped and defaced copy of the Landmark Guide, written by himself. The second time you encounter the pair is later on in the Malum district, in the 5th chapter of the game. This is the dangerous district that's not only under the control of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, but which is populated by horrifically mutated citizens of Krat, referred to as carcasses. The two are surprised to see you, as they last saw you headed towards the fight with King's Flame Fuoco, and expected you to die in the confrontation. Realizing you are a more competent fighter than they had expected, they ask you to help them fight their way through the Malum district. What this means is that they follow behind you, initially contributing to your fight against the carcasses, but then stopping after a short distance, claiming that Black Cat is tired and needs a rest, abandoning you to clear out the most difficult portion of the level on your own. They catch up to you before the fight with the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, but refuse to help you against them, leaving you to fight one of the more challenging bosses of the first half of the game on your own. If you've already played Lies of P, then the story of the fox and the cat tricking Pinocchio into burying his gold coins to sprout a tree will be ringing some bells. Shortly after the fight with the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, you discover a gold coin fruit tree, named for the fruit's peculiar shape. In Lies of P, the gold coin fruit is recontextualized as a legendary cure-all that can be used to cure almost any illness, along with other effects. The use of gold coin fruit is the main role of the character of Jianzhou in the game. Gold coin fruit is a secondary currency which can be used for things like resetting P's level to rebuild your character, as well as buying special wish stones from Jianzhou, which are primarily used for the game's summoning mechanic to get NPCs to help you in boss fights. This gold coin fruit tree functions as an interesting example of how Lies of P adapts part of the story using the unique properties of games. The gold coin fruit tree bears a fruit every 10 minutes real time as long as the game is running. This is a bit of a point of contention among players, because while I think the intended loop here is for you to forget about the tree while you go progress through the game, then come back every 80 minutes or so to harvest a full tree, I've seen many criticize this for feeling like a mobile game mechanic, which it really does. I personally ended up with more gold coin fruits than I knew what to do with, and if you're ever low, you just leave the game running while you go make a sandwich or something. But it is a weird mechanic, until you realize it's a weird mechanic that also has its roots in Carlo Collodi's book. Specifically, the part where the fox and the cat trick Pinocchio into leaving for 20 minutes while he waits for his coins to bear fruit. I'm not necessarily defending the implementation of the gold coin fruit tree as a game mechanic. I don't particularly like real-time waiting mechanics in games that aren't, like, Animal Crossing, but I do think it's interesting to note how literally the game was able to adapt this part of the story mechanically. It is, if not successful, thoughtful and considered. The gold coin fruits are also used in several quests, most importantly, the fox and the cat's quest. The next time you meet the pair, they claim, much like their counterparts from the book, to be sick. Specifically, they claim that Cat has an illness that is causing him to go blind, and beg you for a gold coin fruit. It is worth mentioning, unlike many of the decisions in this game, choosing to give a fruit to the fox and the cat here does nothing to affect your humanity score, which is used to determine which ending you get. Giving you humanity points is how the voice of the game communicates mechanically that it approves of a decision you make. And so it is interesting here that the game is neutral on your decision of how to deal with the pair. Regardless of what you choose, the fox and the cat end up betraying you. At the end of the game's 9th chapter, a lead-in to the final section of the game, the fox, the cat, the imposter Elidoro, and the Black Rabbit Brotherhood betray the Hotel Krat as a part of a plan being perpetrated by the alchemists, who are eventually revealed to be the game's main antagonists. They lead an attack on the Hotel Krat and kidnap Geppetto for the alchemists. You encounter the cat and the fox one last time near the end of the game, just before rescuing Geppetto. First, you encounter the cat, and then you encounter the fox, with each asking for another gold coin fruit, and saying they'll let you pass and leave the city forever if you give them this. If you give them each a gold coin fruit, then they do stay true to their words, letting you pass peacefully. And if you refuse, then you get an extra mini-boss fight against them. Once again, your decision here has no impact on your humanity score, or which ending you will receive. In the original story, the cat and the fox appear again briefly in the book's final chapter. There, they are revealed to have gotten their just desserts. The cat has actually gone blind, and the fox has been paralyzed across half of its body. They beg Pinocchio for aid, and he tells them that they've brought it upon themselves, and that they deserve what they get without a drop of sympathy for the two scoundrels. I think, then, that this begs the question in Lies of P, are the red fox and the black cat lying about Cat's illness, about needing the gold coin fruit at the end? In my opinion, the game leaves this deliberately ambiguous. If the story were one-to-one with the original text, then there would be much less ambiguity about the situation. The fox and the cat, as they exist in the book, are not figures of sympathy. In the game, however, I think it's much easier to read your later interactions with the two as honest ones. They may still be duping P out of his precious gold coin fruit, but I think it's also plausible to read them as desperately trying to survive in a dangerous city, and doing whatever they need to save Cat's eyesight and escape with their lives. A document you can find in the Path of the Pilgrim area, which follows shortly after your first encounter with the two, details the information Krat's newspaper has dug up about the two. Essentially, the pair were from two rival stalker organizations, the Sweepers and the Bastards, but both went rogue and ended up as the criminal pair we now know when Fox discovered that Cat was her long-lost brother, the disowned illegitimate child of her own noble family, which she had already had her own falling out with. The way the two speak about each other portrays genuine affection, and, to be honest, I believe they sincerely just want to leave Krat behind and find new lives outside the city. That's the deal they made with the alchemists, a deal to be let free of the city's confines in exchange for bringing them Geppetto. Is Cat actually going blind? Do they actually need the gold coin fruit as a cure, or do they just know its value? I mean, Cat is an optional mini-boss fight, and while he's not exactly a difficult boss, he doesn't seem like he's literally fighting blind either. I think, though, whether Cat is actually ill or not is kind of irrelevant. Lies of P tells the story of P becoming more human, becoming more compassionate and caring and forgiving. I believe that whether the pair are lying to you or not, forgiving them and giving them their gold coin fruit is positioned by the game as the good thing to do, the human thing to do. It is, perhaps, even critical of the original story's lack of empathy for the two when they find themselves destitute. The game is about P becoming more human, And here, I believe by positioning the fox and the cat as slightly more ambiguous characters than the original story does, and by giving P the choice whether to forgive these two who have wronged him every step of the way, it is giving the player a choice of what the more human thing to do is. Killing those who have wronged you, getting revenge, or showing them empathy, forgiving them. I really like this twist on the story of the fox and the cat. I think it's a really intelligent re-examination of this element of the book that also builds towards Lies of P's larger themes. It is also contrasted against the choice you make a bit earlier, whether to let the imposter Alidoro live or to kill him. There, killing him gives you humanity points. It is framed as the right thing to do by the game, because he is a much less sympathetic and more evil character than the fox and the cat are. In the language of Souls-likes, if they're the closest we get to Patches, then Alidoro is the closest we get to Yurt the Silent Chief or Lautrec. If you wanted to refute my more sympathetic reading of the characters, then pointing out how the game does not give humanity points for sparing them would be how you do that. However, I still think the game frames it as the right choice, with Fox specifically showing you her softer side, finally telling you her true name, Claudia, and even giving you her mask as a sign that she's leaving this life of a stalker behind. I'm also the kind of Souls player who will always spare Patches no matter how many pits he kicks me into, though, so perhaps I just have a softer read of scoundrel characters than I should. Lies of P is a game about P learning to become more human by showing compassion, showing empathy to those around him, and not just doing what he's told. Lies of P is, after all, a game about doing the human thing, not the robotically logical one, refusing to be other characters' mindless puppet. Next, I want to talk about the fourth level of the game, St. Frangelico Cathedral, where the story shifts its focus for the first time from the puppet frenzy to the petrification disease, a less immediate but no less dire threat. Unlike many of the levels of Lies of P, St. Frangelico Cathedral and the Moonlight Town it sits within is mostly an entirely original creation of the game. It is positioned within the game at roughly the same place where the city of Catchfools would be in the book, where the gorilla judge imprisons Pinocchio for the crime of foolishness for having his money stolen by the fox and the cat. Instead, we get St. Frangelico Cathedral, the largest religious institution in Krat, a massive and clearly very expensive cathedral sitting within Krat's oldest and poorest slum, the fishing village that was once the entirety of Krat. Initially, St. Frangelico's Cathedral seems very disconnected from the events of the game. On first playthrough, the whole level felt like a nod to Bloodborne to me, which is of course another of Lies of P's major inspirations. Bloodborne is a lot of adventuring through werewolf churches, so here's a zombie church for Lies of P. St. Frangelico Cathedral does have an interesting place in the lore of the game, however. 30 years ago, there was no grand cathedral, and Archbishop Andreas was simply the priest of a small town. In A Tourist's Guide to Moonlight Town, the slum surrounding the cathedral, we can read, "Since St. Frangelico met the one-winged angel and founded the church, Moonlight Town has become known as the place where pilgrims are lifted to the cathedral by pulley and prepare for their pilgrimages." Andreas's reputation was at its peak when he was appointed as a priest. At the time, Krat was only a poor country town, but Andreas didn't mind and devoted himself to taking care of the people. They were even saying that St. Frangelico himself had returned. Moonlight Town actively helped the priest's good deeds and always acted together as colleagues who delivered the word of God. The decision to accept the alchemists from outside was made in Moonlight Town. After all, it was the birthplace of the Krat we know today. A plaque in front of a statue near the Archbishop's boss room reads, "This is why the cathedral was built and remembered. Pilgrims worship the merciful angel. That built stresses something interesting. Usually, when you see a cathedral, you assume it is very, very old. St. Frangelico Cathedral, though, is new. Remember, Urgo was only discovered 30 years ago. A cathedral on the scale of St. Frangelico would take years, if not decades, to build. On your initial approach to St. Frangelico, if you look at the rooftops, you'll notice something significant: scaffoldings and construction. The cathedral isn't even completed. While the cathedral wants to appear very, very old, it is in fact brand new. What this implies is that the reason Andreas accepted the alchemists with open arms, who would later completely reinvent the city, is because the alchemists bought him. They profited from Urgo, and Andreas profited from them. The item description for Andreas's rare Urgo describes him as being slowly corrupted by gold. All of this was a canny move by the alchemists. The alchemists have done this not only to gain unlimited access to Urgo, but to make their efforts appear more legitimate to the people of Krat, and to gain their loyalty. Whatever the alchemists do, it is officially sanctioned by the church. They are cloaking mad science in the guise of religion, taking something new and strange and convincing the populace that it is the oldest thing there is: religion. As I said before, this level is where the game shifts its focus from being about the puppet frenzy to being about the petrification disease, and the enemies also shift from fighting puppets to fighting carcasses, the mutated former residents of Krat. The path to the cathedral is called the Path of the Pilgrim. It is designed as the destination for a religious pilgrimage. The cathedral and the surrounding slums are the first place we see carcass enemies, and it is here that we get a very important note written by one of the residents of the slum. The note says, "Everything changed after the doctor spread the blue medicine. I buried my brother. I don't even know if it was my brother. Who is the doctor? Whose blue hair is in this cane?" Even before we encounter any carcass enemies, back in Vanini Works, we can hear rumors of a cure for the petrification disease, but also hints that something is very wrong with this cure. A note in Vanini Works is written by a man named Clark Shore, who goes by Dr. Cure-All. Dr. Cure-All was a snake oil salesman who somehow got his hands on the cure being developed by the alchemists and spread it throughout the city to make a profit. His note reads, "I made innumerable medicine sales under the guise of it being a cure-all. At first, even I was sure about my experiment. Early on, the cure really was effective in neutralizing the petrification disease. And why would the great alchemist's records be wrong? My cure was perfect. But what went wrong? I dare not record what the ones who got treatment turned into. That was literally hell, and when I realized that I was the gatekeeper who opened the doors, I ran away. How can I atone for my sin? I only tried to treat patients and earn a few extra coins. I'm dying, and this is my penitence. I also have the petrification disease, but I'm not getting the cure. I'd rather turn to stone and freeze to death. God, please forgive my terrible sins." So, something is off about the alchemist's cure for the petrification disease, and here in St. Frangelico we see what that something is. The cure does work. It does stop the body from turning to inanimate stone. Unfortunately, it also warps the body beyond recognition, into the terrible creatures now known as carcasses. The alchemists know the threat the petrification disease poses, and they intend to perfect their cure, if only to save themselves from the epidemic. In order to do that, they needed test subjects, and what better way to find those test subjects, people with the petrification disease, who will willingly submit to treatment, than to have an archbishop convince them that the cure is a divine blessing. Of course, another explanation is that the doctor mentioned in the slum resident's note is Dr. Cure-All. I'm inclined to believe that Moonlight Town was specifically a testing ground for one of the alchemists, though, perhaps even their leader, because I'm not sure how Clark Shore would have gotten a lock of Sophia's hair, and we see throughout the rest of the game that the alchemists have been performing experiments with the cure in an attempt to perfect it, and we know that St. Frangelico was allied with the alchemists. Whoever was distributing the cure, it resulted in St. Frangelico being completely overrun by carcasses, and even Archbishop Andreas himself has mutated into a monstrous form. Before he did this, however, he realized just how evil the alchemists truly were, and expressed regret over his part in empowering them. The alchemists have a sinister secret plan that they are trying to enact, and Andreas is trying to put a stop to it. In another lore book, The Archbishop's Diary, we can read details of Andreas's change of heart. I have their relic in my hand, thanks to Cecile. I won't let those bastards ruin Krat anymore. This will purify the city. This disaster was divine judgment. They should have been turned away all those 30 years ago. But this will be the end. Krat is a city blessed by God, and I, Andreas, will come to its rescue. So what we can take from this is that before his transformation, Andreas had a woman named Cecile steal a relic from the alchemists. A relic which I'll tell you now is called the Arm of God. Without this Arm of God, the alchemists' plans cannot be executed. Cecile is a minor NPC in the game, a murderer who turned to the cloth and sought forgiveness from the church. It's reasonable to assume that before his transformation, Andreas hid the Arm of God away somewhere, and that the alchemists needed him out of the picture in order to retrieve the arm. Indeed, when you defeat Andreas at the end of the game's 4th chapter, you are treated to a cutscene of the mysterious leader of the alchemists, Simon Manus, turning on a great machine to gather more ergo. This is, admittedly, a little messy. The cutscene plays the moment Andreas is destroyed, but the alchemists would have needed time to retrieve the arm. It is later confirmed by a hidden note left for you in Geppetto's secret workshop that this is what's going on. The note is titled, Letter from Someone Who Has Gone Ahead, and it's addressed to P from Simon Manus. It reads, Dear Geppetto's puppet, who will come to this workshop train. I'm really thankful to you. A workshop train hidden by Geppetto. Isn't that something? If not for you, how would I have found this place? Unfortunately for Geppetto, I have the ability to read someone's memories. In the Malum district, I had a hunch. I thought that if they followed you, Geppetto's puppet, they'd find the relic he stole. And that hunch was right. The relic has been returned to our sacred place. Now that the stage is set, the doors will open. I know all this is confusing, but soon you'll learn everything. Thank you. You were a good guide. SM. Again, this is a little messy. It doesn't totally line up with what we see in the game. I believe this is implying that the Arm of God was in the Malum District Town Hall, the same place where you find the portrait of P with the growing nose after defeating the Black Rabbit Brotherhood for the first time. That makes some sense. It would imply that Andreas entrusted the Arm of God to Geppetto, who we will see is at odds with the alchemist's goals, but then the note also implies it was hidden in Geppetto's secret workshop on a train in Krat Central Station. Also, why does that cutscene of Simon saying the stage is set and turning the Ergo Collector back on play as soon as we defeat Andreas a chapter earlier? I don't have the answer for this, and that bothers me. If the answers to these questions do not exist, and this is not just a failure on my fault to find them, then that is a problem with the narrative of Lies of P. But it's close enough for jazz. I think this is what's going on with Andreas and the Cathedral. So, the follow-up question. What does any of that have to do with Pinocchio? Well, not much. As I said before, St. Frangelico Cathedral and the Moonlight Town are pretty much an original creation of the game. There is an interesting parallel to Catchfools specifically, which I want to highlight. This was brought to my attention by the annotations within the version of Pinocchio I've already mentioned, and on the subject of the city of Catchfools, the author writes, Several commentators have speculated that Collodi had in mind his native Florence. In 1865, after the declaration of the new state of Italy, but before the process of unification was complete, Florence was made the capital. On the assumption that it would remain the capital indefinitely, ambitious projects of urban renewal were undertaken to adapt the city to its new role. Ministries and other government departments were set up in Florence, and large numbers of state employees flooded into the city. But in 1870, Italian troops captured Rome, and the following year, Rome became the capital. Florence, and many Florentines, never received the expected return on their investments. The city was left heavily indebted, and for many years afterwards, its inhabitants had to pay increased taxes to repay its borrowings. Not only were they poorer, but many were no doubt left with a feeling that they had been taken for a ride. With this in mind, there is an interesting parallel, not between the city of Catchfools and Moonlight Town, but between the real-life inspiration for Catchfools, Florence, and Moonlight Town. It's easy to look at Moonlight Town, living in the literal shadow of a grand cathedral, but otherwise abandoned when industry and money came to the area, with the wealthy instead choosing to build an entirely new city next door and leave them to rot, and see a comparison to this description of how Florence must have felt in 1870 and the following decades, when they were abandoned as the capital in favor of Rome, which itself contains the Vatican City. Was this a deliberate choice made by the developers when they were designing the area and positioning it as the game's answer to Catchfools? Or is it a happy accident that it works so well as a metaphor for real-world context in which the original novel was written? I don't know, but I think it's worth mentioning here, and regardless of intention, the metaphor still very much works. Next, let's discuss an area that is much more directly adapting a famous section of the original story, albeit in a bit of a clever twist. Lies of P's Land of Toys, Rosa Isabelle Street. My favorite twist on adaptation in Lies of P is its interpretation of the Land of Toys, or as it's known in the Disney version, Pleasure Island. In the original story, Pinocchio is convinced by his friend Romeo, who is nicknamed Lampwick or Candlewick depending on the translation, to go with him to the Land of Toys, a place where boys can play all day and never study, do whatever they wish with no repercussions, at least initially. The idea of the Land of Toys is rooted in a medieval myth of a kind of utopia called Cockaigne. Cockaigne is a seductive place where physical comforts are always met, and no one ever has to work, free to indulge in food, drink, and sex to their heart's desire forever. You can see how this sort of place would gain a mythological reverence among medieval peasants. The Land of Toys in the book serves as a land of the Lotus Eaters, a cautionary tale against such laziness, warning that no such place can ever exist. When Pinocchio and Lampwick go to the Land of Toys, their first 5 months are idyllic, all they thought they would be. A place populated by other children, all free to play games from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. Of course, this results in the two boys contracting donkey fever, which we've already discussed. Surprisingly, the Disney version is actually a lot more hard-edged than the original story. In the original, it is a dangerous place for the children who visit, but there's a childlike innocence to what the children there get up to. The Disney version, perhaps because it is a broader and less focused morality tale, imagines Pleasure Island as a seedy place where children are corrupted by the world. A place where children are able to drink beer, smoke cigars, and gamble. The original story, of course, with a much tighter focus, doesn't need those elements in the Land of Toys, but I do think for the Disney film, this harder edge results in Pleasure Island being the best and most memorable part of the film. Once again, it's not hard to imagine a lesser version of Lies of P that reimagines Pleasure Island as Krat's red light district, a seedy underbelly where you're fighting sex bots or something, or where the character of Lampwick could have served as something of a distraction from P's journey to stop the puppet frenzy. Instead, Lies of P gives us Rosa Isabelle Street, which is, in my opinion, the best level of the game. Instead of leaning into the lowbrow delights that Pleasure Island represents, it portrays the highest of high society. It is an arts district, the cultural hub of the city of Krat, full of theaters, music halls, and culminating in the Estella Opera House. We come to Rosa Isabelle Street after journeying through Moonlight Town and the Malum District, the oldest and most run-down slums in Krat. By contrasting the levels this way, the game offers a touch of criticism of the social structure of Krat. Much like in the real-life history of the industrial revolutions of various nations, the distribution of wealth and comfort was incredibly uneven. All of this high society is, of course, contrasted by the fall the city is experiencing. Most of those theaters and music halls are ablaze as the puppets rampage through the city. This is what the people of Krat are sinking their money into, while the slums surrounding the city, and as we'll later see, the environment surrounding the city, go to hell. This level culminates in a boss fight against one of the most interesting characters in the game, its version of Lampwick in the form of Romeo, the king of puppets. The boss fight with Romeo opens with my favorite cutscene in the game, where what is obviously a marionette representation of Geppetto takes the heart from a representation of someone who looks like P and then places it into a blank mannequin puppet, who rises to its feet and begins to perform for Geppetto, who applauds. The king of puppets descends from the ceiling before offering a hand of friendship to P, who strikes it away. This turns the king's face from a happy face to one of sadness. Not, I think it's worth mentioning, one of rage, before the fight begins. In the tradition of Souls-like storytelling, it can be pretty hard to understand what's going on here your first time through. Lies of P tells its story more directly than something like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 1, but this cutscene in particular, while captivating, isn't something you have the frame of reference to understand your first time through. My first time through, I thought this was just Romeo recognizing P as a puppet, since he is the king of puppets, trying to get P on his side instead of Geppetto's. That's partially correct, but his motivations run deeper than this. This is a warning from P's closest friend, and to understand what's going on here, we have to dive into the nature of Ergo. Ergo is not just a refined version of the mineral Crowd. Crowd is, somehow, able to capture Ergo within it. Ergo is souls. Not just your souls in a mechanical Souls-like sense, in that it's the currency you use to level up and buy things, although it is also that. Ergo is quite literally the ephemeral essence of life. 30 years before the events of the game, the alchemists found that Crowd, the mineral discovered beneath Krat, was able to capture the souls of those who died from the petrification disease. This is the true nature of the disease. It is not just physical, but a sort of metaphysical illness. The petrification disease freezes time, memories, vital life essence of those afflicted with it, and that life essence is able to be crystallized within Crowd. This crystallized life was Ergo, and the alchemists began to mine the Ergo from an area that became known as the Relic of Trismegistus, and use it for all sorts of things.
The petrification disease freezes time and memory within the afflicted body. Ergo is the purified essence of that life, trapped by the petrification disease.
Crowd is going to be important later on, but for now, understand that it has been beneath the land that Krat now occupies for at least 600 years, and that unlike normal mineral deposits, Crowd is constantly growing. Some individuals, called the Listeners, were born with the power to hear the Ergo whisper, hear the memories and thoughts of the dead. Some, like Sophia, had even greater control, like the ability to transfer their own thoughts across Ergo like a radio transmission, which is how Sophia speaks to you without being physically present. When Sophia learned the true nature of Ergo, she was granted even greater powers beyond that, like her seemingly limited ability to turn back time. Perhaps most importantly, Geppetto was able to use this crystallized Ergo to power the puppets. Eventually, though, the Ergo placed within puppets would awaken, and the puppets would go from simple automatons to actual manifestations of the humans they once were. We see these manifested puppets many times throughout the game. Romeo is one such awakened puppet, but if we follow all the NPC quests and exhaust all dialogue, we also see many of the puppets who initially seem to be purely automated are actually living, thinking beings. There's a side quest in Rosa Isabelle Street about a man who married a puppet, who asks us to go retrieve his wife's wedding ring. Initially, it seems like she was just a blank slate, and we can lie to the man saying she left a message that she loved him. But if you return much later, you can discover she actually has left a message for him, saying she loved him. Polendina has similarly fallen in love with the woman he serves, Lady Antonia. Pulcinella, meanwhile, has formed a father-son relationship with Vanini, in the vein of Alfred and Bruce Wayne. Of course, not all awakened puppets take well to their resurrection. Arlecchino, the king of riddles / serial killer who is on the loose in Gotham City, is eventually revealed to be one such awakened puppet, who is killing the citizens of Krat as revenge for them using puppets, who very much have souls and consciousness, as slave labor. The alchemists and Geppetto have functionally found a means of resurrecting the dead within mechanical bodies. Unfortunately, that crystallized life is also a tremendous source of power, which Simon Manus, the current leader of the alchemists, plans to exploit. Now that we understand what Ergo is and what the petrification disease really is, that brings us back to Romeo. Each puppet boss has dialogue that appears scrambled on your first run through the game. Late in the game, you get a device that is able to translate the jumbled transmissions of the puppets, letting you understand what they are saying. Lies of P has a pretty solid New Game Plus mode, which introduces more skills that are exclusive to New Game Plus and New Game Plus 2, but more importantly for our purposes, it also lets you keep this device that lets you understand what the puppets are saying. Most importantly, though, it lets P understand a message that was being sent to him by Romeo over the airwaves, transmitted by Ergo. The message says this.
Carlo, I hope you can hear me. I'm Romeo. We grew up together in the Monad Charity House. Remember? We're best friends. I'm doing what I can to fend off both the petrification disease and the alchemists. My puppets and I are taking a stand against death itself. That's why I tried sending you messengers. But you got rid of them all. You're still an unstoppable fellow. I remember you. No reason for us to fight, I suppose. I'm Romeo. We grew up together in the Monad Charity House. Remember? We're best friends. I'm Romeo. We're best friends.
So who is Carlo? Well, you've probably already pieced this together. P is the puppet containing the crystallized Ergo of Carlo. P was Carlo back when he lived a human life. There are hints about this reveal throughout the game. For example, the reason we find a portrait of someone who looks very much like P is because it is a portrait of Carlo, the original human son of Geppetto. Geppetto was not a great dad to Carlo, unfortunately. Emotionally distant and neglectful, focused on his own work instead of his son, Geppetto sent Carlo to a boarding school, the Monad Charity House, also known as the Rosa Estate. The name Monad should ring a bell, as it was founded by Valentinus Monad, Sophia's father. Charity house might sound like a strange term to be used for a boarding school, but a note explains that the Monad Charity House was initially designed as a charity home for the poor children of Krat, but with the influence and funding of the Monad family, it eventually transitioned into being a high-class boarding school. Sophia herself was involved in the operations of the school for a time, sponsoring events like a charity concert there to raise funds for the poor. At the Rose Estate, Carlo met and became fast friends with Romeo. As we see in a flashback late in the game, both boys were hoping to one day become stalkers. As Carlo continued studying, he grew increasingly resentful of his father for not taking an interest in his life. Sadly, tragedy would eventually strike the Monad Charity House. A sudden outbreak of the petrification disease claimed the lives of most of those present there at the time in what would become known as the Rose Estate Incident. The circumstances surrounding the Rose Estate Incident are highly suspicious. Valentinus Monad, who again was the leader of the alchemists, would be one of the people killed by this outbreak, which led to his second-in-command, Simon Manus, the main antagonist of the game, taking control of the organization. We learn from Sophia later on that Simon has the ability to deliberately spread the petrification disease, and that he's been behind the mass outbreak, taking the lives of everyone in Krat we see in the game. We also learn that the investigation surrounding the Rose Estate incident was almost immediately shut down, under the pretense of needing the force investigating it to help contain the outbreak. It's very, very heavily implied that Simon was behind this outbreak, using it as a means to assassinate Valentinus. Now, Simon is using that device we saw after killing Andreas to harvest a massive amount of ergo from across the city, which is why the petrification disease has run as out of control as we now see it has. In this outbreak, the lives of both Romeo and Carlo would also be taken. This is the event that motivates Geppetto through the entire game. This is why he ultimately creates P, an advanced puppet replica of his son, not bound by the Grand Covenant and containing the P organ, a new specialized heart containing Carlo's ergo. Geppetto wants to use P as a means of resurrecting Carlo, truly bringing his son back to life. Geppetto also understands the truth, that Simon was the one behind the death of his son, which puts him at odds with the alchemists, which led to him cutting ties with the organization after the Rose Estate incident. Secretly, Geppetto would plot his revenge against the alchemists, a way to interfere with Simon's ultimate plans. P was not the only puppet Geppetto would create. From Romeo's ergo, Geppetto would create the King of Puppets as a part of his plan to stop Simon. The ergo we get from defeating the King of Puppets reads, "When the boy opened his eyes, he found himself sitting on a throne that he had not asked for. When he sought his friend of the past, he clung to his memories, even though he knew there was no going back." Romeo and the puppets are not rampaging without a cause. They are not on a violent bent to kill humans out of cruelty or hatred like Arlecchino is, but to attempt to stop the alchemists' plans. We see puppets and carcasses fighting each other anytime the two are encountered at the same point. The puppets want to stop the carcasses, and want to prevent Simon from using the petrification disease to gather the ergo for his evil plot. The best way to stop Simon from gathering ergo is to cut off the supply. If humans are killed by puppets, they can't be killed by the petrification disease, and their souls can't be trapped within Crowd and turned into ergo. When we defeat Romeo, when we kill him at the end of the game's 6th chapter, we are making Simon's plans easier. The end of Chapter 6 is where the game goes from being about puppets to being about Simon and the alchemists almost exclusively. After we defeat Romeo, we're treated to a short bit of the next level where we see all of the puppets in the streets have stopped attacking, stopped fighting, and are in mourning for their king. The plan has failed. They have not stopped the alchemists. They have not stopped Simon because of P. While this is a noble goal, they aren't doing it completely of their own volition. The Grand Covenant I mentioned before, those laws of robotics that should be preventing the puppets from doing anything like this, are imprinted upon every puppet when they are created. Even puppets who have awakened to their egos are supposed to be bound by the Grand Covenant. The first law of the Grand Covenant is that puppets must obey their creator's commands. So, for example, Vanini, who owned the factory where the puppets were produced, should have been able to stop the frenzy with a single command. The biggest mystery in the first half of the game is why the Grand Covenant has failed. In the game's final chapter, Vanini gives you a message that he cannot understand, one that was being transmitted by Romeo. As a puppet, P is able to understand it. It says,
Carlo, I hope you can hear me. The laws of the Grand Covenant bind us. We're his puppets. First law, all puppets must obey their creator's commands. Law 0. The creator's name is Geppetto. Giuseppe Geppetto.
The Grand Covenant has not failed. Unbeknownst to everyone, Geppetto wrote the Grand Covenant to contain a secret Law 0, that Geppetto himself is the creator of the puppets, and they must all follow his commands. Geppetto is, fittingly, the one pulling the strings of all of the puppets in Krat, including Romeo. So if Geppetto is the one behind the puppet frenzy, the one who created the King of Puppets as a way to secretly interfere with the alchemist's plans, why is he now sending P to take out the King of Puppets, to put a stop to his own plan? Well, there is a reason, and we'll get there, but we won't be able to fully understand what's going on until the end of the game. We've got a lot of ground to cover before we get there. Defeating Romeo marks roughly the halfway point of the game. So let's move on to talking about the game's 8th chapter, The Barren Swamp. At this point, I want to ask, what is causing the petrification disease? We've gotten very clear answers about what the specific effects of the petrification disease are. The petrification disease is what happens when someone's time, memories, essentially soul, are siphoned out of them and stored within the mineral crowd, creating crystallized ergo. We know that Simon is able to deliberately spread the petrification disease, and that he was likely behind the mass outbreak that began at the Rosa estate and is still spreading through the city now. The monsters that are now rampaging through Krat, the carcasses, are the results of the alchemist's imperfect cure, which keeps the body from turning to stone, but hideously warps it and drives the patient mad. But what is actually causing the petrification disease at all, let alone the full-on epidemic that is now seizing Krat? As far as I can tell, this is never explicitly stated within the game. However, there is evidence to suggest that the petrification disease is being caused by overexposure to ergo. The game gets really close to saying this directly several times throughout, but it does always stop short of saying it explicitly unless I've missed something. The closest I can find to this being said is the item description for the weapon Noblesse Oblige, which reads, "The stalker who desired wealth made a contract with a devil that liked music to gain a cudgel. Along with this, he was gifted with overflowing ergo and the petrification disease." This is a weapon that increases the amount of ergo you get per kill, so saying that the use of this weapon gave the stalker both an incredible amount of ergo and the petrification disease is very close to confirming it outright. As we'll see later on, the alchemist's ultimate plan involves Simon using a tremendous amount of ergo, and they are also highly motivated to find a cure, as we'll see the various stages of their experiments slowly perfect the cure, going from carcasses that are pure monsters to ones which regain some of their humanity to one of the game's final bosses, Laxasha, who is their first perfected test subject. If the ultimate plan is for Simon to gain tremendous power by channeling a staggering amount of ergo, and ergo causes the petrification disease, then it would explain why the alchemists are so highly motivated to find a cure, not only to save themselves from the epidemic, but to prevent Simon from transforming when they enact their final plan. I only hesitate to say outright that this is the cause, because I don't want to misrepresent the game's lore, and if the developers chose to keep some level of ambiguity about the cause, that was a deliberate choice, and I want to acknowledge that ambiguity is there. I also won't be surprised if I've overlooked something obvious, though, and if the top comment on this video is someone saying, "Oh, yeah, it's said right here." If ergo causes the petrification disease, then the slow rise of the disease is no mystery. What I believe to be the original cause of the plague that's sweeping Krat is the area we spend the 8th chapter of the game in, the Barren Swamp. The Barren Swamp, much like St. Frangelico Cathedral, initially seems relatively disconnected from the rest of the game's narrative. Vanini sends you there for a MacGuffin, a rare piece of golden ergo he needs to help you reach the island of the alchemists, where their secret plot is unfolding. The Barren Swamp is the obligatory poison swamp level in a Souls-like. It's the game's Blight Town or its Valley of Defilement. What I like about this area, however, is how it contextualizes its poison swamp as an area of industrial waste. In the Travel Guide to Krat entry we can find about the area, we can read, "The Barren Swamp is the area that showcases Krat's shadows well. The Barren Swamp is where scrapped puppets are discarded. Because it's composed of swamps and ravines, it wasn't part of the city's development. In the past it was briefly a coal mine, but was soon forgotten because of the ergo discovery. Later, a few shrewd factory businesses concerned about scrapped puppets began to dispose of them illegally here, turning the swamp into what it is now. A swamp full of discarded puppets and corrupted animals. It's Krat's grave itself." The Barren Swamp is not a naturally poisonous place. It was used as an illegal dumping site for puppets, whether they be imperfect or just in disrepair. These puppets were dumped in the swamp and forgotten, but they still contained ergo. We see thousands upon thousands of discarded puppets in this area. All of that ergo seeped into the groundwater and poisoned it. At the end of the area, after we beat the puppet-devouring green monster, we climb a ladder up and emerge back where the game began, Krat Central Station. This is not a distant place, a far-off dumping ground. This is the very foundation Krat is built upon. All of that pollution contaminated the water supply, and eventually, the petrification disease began. This is further supported by a note we find in a hidden area of the swamp, a ravine filled with people who sought shelter from the crisis before petrifying or transforming. The note, written by Medoro, reads, "This place is contaminated too. There isn't much extra water left. The kind hermit helped me, but he knows he's not going to last much longer either. Terrible mutations from the side effects of the petrification disease neutralization process. Many people of Krat will turn into carcasses, the alchemists' monsters. We risked our lives and fought from each post, but sometimes there are no rewards. Still, some things are left. Something even power and lies can't hide. The truth. Someone will unearth the truth. Someone will unveil the lie, taking the extra step forward for the people coming behind. I believe that was my role. I am Medoro the reporter. My weapon was my pen and the truth. Now I leave my records to you who visit this place." From Medoro. The game's most out-of-place, inexplicable boss fight occurs at the end of this area with the green monster of the swamp, or as it's called in its second phase, the puppet-devouring green monster. No concrete origin for the monster is given, but one note speculates that the monster is a creation of the alchemists, gathering up discarded puppets and sucking the ergo out of them. It's never fully explained what its purposes are, whether it's gathering the ergo for the alchemists to use, or whether it's just another discarded experiment that is now feeding on the ergo of these puppets, but regardless of what its purpose for devouring the puppets is, it's grown to disturbing proportions in doing so. One possible explanation for what the green monster is doing comes all the way back in the game's 3rd chapter, in Vanini Works, where we can find a report written by one of the factory's managers addressed to Vanini. As per your orders, I conducted a quality investigation on the ergo supplied by the alchemists. Of course, it was done secretly. Certainly, the quality of ergo was getting worse over time. I don't doubt the alchemists, but the decrease in quality is too widespread to call it a coincidence. At this rate, this quarter's puppets will have a high chance of defects. The most important thing is the quality of the ergo, after all. According to a reliable source, the high-level alchemists are running ergo production experiments lately using another method. Personally, I think their secret experiments have something to do with the decrease in ergo quality. Are they wringing out the bodies of discarded puppets in the barren swamp or something? Anyway, I recommend approaching them carefully instead of complaining to them. The primary source of ergo has been the Relic of Trismegistus, the mine where the Crowd deposit is. It is possible, then, that as the alchemists needed more and more ergo for their experiments, but needed to continue providing the industries of Krat with ergo, they resorted to recycling the remnants of ergo in discarded puppets from the swamp and gave this lower quality ergo to supply the city, keeping the highest quality material for themselves. This would portray the monster as a sort of collection device. Or perhaps it wasn't even made by the alchemists, and it's some sort of beast that started feeding on the ergo of the swamp and was transformed in the process. It seems to be directly related to the carcasses, as in its second phase, we see it has the ability to push itself within the broken body of a dead puppet and take it over from within. As soon as this fight is over and we return to Krat Central Station, we'll discover that almost all of the remaining puppets in the city have been taken over by carcasses in the same way. There are also specific carcass enemies, the ones which fall out of slimy cocoons suspended from the ceiling in Lorenzini Arcade, and the Return to Krat Central Station, which have extremely similar features to the green monster, particularly their eyes. The puppet-devouring green monster is a reference to a character from the original story called the Green Fisherman, who has been cut from most adaptations of the book, even relatively faithful ones. He's a large, gluttonous ogre of a man who fishes Pinocchio out from the sea, and who does not understand that Pinocchio is not a fish even when Pinocchio talks to him, and attempts to eat Pinocchio before he is saved by the mastiff Alidoro. Using deep-cut characters like the Green Fisherman in the game is another example of the dedication which Lies of P has to adapting its source material and going far beyond the familiar iconography which a lesser game would have stopped at. Once we defeat the green monster, we make our way back to where we began, Krat Central Station. By the time we get there, things have gone completely out of control. The puppets have been largely defeated, but nearly all of the surviving humans in Krat have either turned to stone or have been transformed into carcasses. The alchemists have done this to gather the ergo from everyone in the city at once, and in doing so, have caused the Crowd deposit to grow so rapidly that it begins to sprout from the earth, rupturing the ground, knocking aside buildings, and opening massive ravines in the middle of the streets. All of this is the result of Krat's unregulated, uncontrolled industry and pollution. At this point, we're making our way into the game's final act. This is where we fight our way back to Hotel Krat and discover that it's been attacked and Geppetto has been kidnapped. After this, we briefly travel through the Relic of Trismegistus, the origin of Crowd, before making our way to the Island of Alchemists on a submarine named the Pistris. When we reach the island, Sophia appears to us and confirms something which she even says you've probably figured out by now. The Sophia we've been seeing isn't the real Sophia Manad. Using her powers as a listener, she is able to communicate using ergo, something which normal humans aren't typically able to do. Sophia's powers go beyond that of a typical listener. She is unique. Most of the listeners, from what lore we get, seem limited to the ability to hear the memories and thoughts of others. When Sophia gained an understanding of the true nature of ergo and of the petrification disease, she awakened to new powers. Understanding that ergo is a form of crystallized time, she gained the limited ability to rewind the clock. She's also able to channel ergo to strengthen you, which seems to be a unique ability. When Simon learned of Sophia's powers, he coveted them. He wanted her powers. They became an essential part of his plans, and so when she would not willingly cooperate with him, he kidnapped her and imprisoned her within the Archabbey, the massive tower we've seen channeling ergo, which is located on the Alchemist's Island. This is the true reason Sophia woke P at the start of the game. She wanted to help Krat, yes, but she also needed someone to save her from Simon's torture, his exploitation of her powers. Sophia's goal has always been to get P to set her free. So, what specifically does Simon need Sophia's powers for? Well, the answer here seems to be twofold. First, we know that Sophia is able to channel ergo to strengthen others. This is why she's our level-up lady. Her powers are how P levels up throughout the game. Simon doesn't just want to collect a massive amount of ergo, he wants to channel all of that ergo into himself. In other words, I believe Simon is using Sophia's powers against her will to level himself up. We're also able to see the elixir which the alchemists are using to cure the petrification disease throughout the game, and it's a sort of turquoise green-blue. Blue is a color associated with ergo, of course, but it's also a color heavily associated with Sophia, our blue fairy. The use of this turquoise color further implies to me that the elixir is specifically somehow being created from Sophia, and not ergo more generally. In The Adventures of Pinocchio, the fairy is described using the Italian word turchino, which is now an archaic word meaning dark blue. This word was supplanted in the time since the book was written by just blue, and so with turchino's similarity to the Italian word for turquoise, turchese, the fairy's name in the original book is often mistranslated as the turquoise fairy. If you go to the Wikipedia article on The Adventures of Pinocchio, for example, they have the character listed as the fairy with turquoise hair. Stuff like this is why I made that note about translation at the start of the video. We don't really see much else associated with the color turquoise in the game, aside from this elixir. As such, I think it's reasonable to draw this as a connection between this turquoise elixir and Sophia. Another connection drawn between the elixir and Sophia is back in that note from a slum resident I mentioned earlier. As a reminder, that note served to draw a direct connection between a doctor spreading the cure and people becoming monsters. The final words of the note are, "Who is the doctor? Whose blue hair is in this cane?" The only reason narratively that you would draw a direct connection between Sophia and the distribution of the cure like this, I believe, is if you're trying to imply a connection between Sophia and the cure itself. Finally, and most compellingly, when we find Sophia's true body, she's in a frightful state. Not only is she connected to a series of threads, perhaps tubing of some kind, visually symbolizing the way she has been forced to be Simon's puppet the entire game, but the lower half of her body is covered in some sort of fungal growth, and weirdly butterflies, and this growth becomes a dark blue liquid as it reaches the ground. So, yeah, I think it is very, very heavily implied that the cure is somehow being made from Sophia's body, whether it's her blood or whatever this strange fungal growth is. The reason the alchemists have been performing so many experiments with the cure is because in Simon's view, the petrification disease is not an inherently bad thing. The problem, in Simon's mind, with the petrification disease is not the physical effects it has on the body, turning it to stone, as he sees this as a way of purifying and strengthening the body. This is one of the many insane ideas which led to Geppetto cutting ties with the alchemists. The problem, as Simon sees it, is that the disease needs to be refined. It needs to harden the body while keeping the form and sanity of the subject intact. Simon views this as evolution, the next step of humanity. We see a lot of evidence of the alchemists' experiments trying to perfect their cure throughout the game. The Archabbey, for example, is filled with the venerated bodies of alchemists who got the treatment and did not survive. I think the best and most direct example of an experiment comes from a log we can find near the Owl Doctor in the Barren Swamp. This log reads, Name, Test Subject 890. Status Report. The most successful case from the prototype elixir injection experiments. 3 patients suffering from the petrification disease who got the elixir injection at the same time died. Right up until their deaths, they experienced painful necrosis and skin ruptures, seizures and convulsions, and crystalline metastases throughout the body. Ultimately, they became mutations known as the carcasses. Number 890 was able to suppress neutralization side effects and has been stable for 56 hours so far. Just the dissociative amnesia, seizures, aggressive urges, and hallucinations found in typical petrification disease victims. Personal opinion. I confirmed that the Order's proposal to take a stalker with verified physical abilities as a sample is very effective. The sample extracted from subject number 890 is estimated to help the elixir develop in the next step. Sister Adriana, who will receive the next baptism, is expected to be able to fulfill the Order's wishes. Wake up, evolve, ascend. We, the Reborners, will prepare for the birth of God. Sister Adriana is one of the major named alchemists we encounter through the game, although we meet her under a different name. Throughout the game, we see evidence of the alchemists slowly making progress in perfecting their cure. In the first half of the game, all of the carcasses we see are completely feral, horribly warped monsters. This changed late in the game's 7th chapter at the Grand Exhibition, where we start encountering alchemists who are clearly warped, their proportions off, their skin having turned gray, but who have not completely lost themselves. It's worth noting that all of the cured enemies are still not considered human by the game. There's an amulet that increases damage to human enemies, and another that increases damage to carcass enemies. The alchemist enemies are all classified as carcass enemies. Only the uncorrupted stalkers, like Red Fox, are classified as human enemies. The level of the Grand Exhibition is itself interesting. It falls immediately after you defeat Romeo at the Isabelle Opera House. It's a show, an exhibition, meant to show the value of puppets to the world. This Grand Exhibition was, of course, cancelled due to the threats of the puppet frenzy and the petrification disease epidemic, but its placement after the section adapting The Land of Toys makes this the game's equivalent of the circus where Pinocchio is sold to work in the novel after he's transformed into a donkey. If this comparison is intentional, then it's looser than a lot of the elements adapted as levels, but the comparison is there. Pinocchio and Romeo find themselves 2 boys transformed into donkeys and then sold into hard labor. The Grand Exhibition is intended as a show floor, Krat's consumer electronics show, to sell puppets to the rest of the world into all sorts of labor. When we remember that puppets are actually the souls of people who have died of the petrification disease placed in mechanical bodies, this sort of commodification of people who find themselves removed from their human bodies does mirror that section of the book. Back to the petrification disease cure, we actually meet one of the test subjects that seems to be from this era, broadly speaking, as a friendly NPC. Test subject 826 is a man who was cured of the petrification disease and kept his mind intact, although it doesn't seem like he kept his memories from before he contracted the disease intact. He even developed powers similar to a listener, able to read the memories of people crystallized within Ergo. The process is not as elegant as, say, Sophia's ability seems to be, however. Instead of an ethereal presence able to functionally read minds, 826 has to literally eat ergo crystals in order to read the memories contained within. The alchemists had imprisoned him when they learned of his power, and were force-feeding him crystals in order to gain intel before we meet him in Arch Abbey. Thankfully, he gets a relatively happy ending, as once we've cleared the way, he's able to make it out of the Abbey and goes to Rosa Isabelle Street, having an appreciation for the arts and having always wanted to see it. Another variety of cured subjects we encounter who have developed special powers are the Disruption Carcasses, more easily recognized by their mini-boss version, the Walker of Illusions. These guys did keep their bodies mostly intact, but they pretty clearly lost their minds in the process. The Walker of Illusions also has an exposed brain. These guys can scream, which causes buildup of a status effect called Disruption. It's never explained what exactly the Disruption status effect is. It's the equivalent of Curse from the Souls series, in that it just kills you outright if you let it build to full. But it's somehow related to Crowd because of Disruption crystals, which cause the effect, sprouting off from the Crowd cluster once it breaks through to the surface. The Walker of Illusions also has the ability to clone itself, although this is presumably some sort of illusion because of its name. Clone still hurts if it hits you, though. A more successful variant of cured alchemists are the Wrestler variety. These come in an elite enemy form, but the most recognizable one is Champion Victor, the boss at the end of the Grand Exhibition. This guy was a well-respected wrestler in Krat before contracting the petrification disease. The alchemists turned him into Bane. He's Bane now. That's 2 Batman villains in the game. Victor gained tremendous strength from the cure and kept his mind intact, but seems to need a constant supply of the elixir and was not considered a full success. This brings us back to Sister Adriana, who would be considered the first success, the first perfected being. Sister Adriana was an alchemist who was completely and utterly in love with Simon Manus. Not only was she a true believer in the alchemist's cause, she was undyingly loyal to Simon specifically. She's the one writing a series of notes we're going to talk about a little later on called So Said Pistis, doctrine dictated by Simon Manus himself. When the alchemists believed they had perfected the cure before Simon would take it, he needed a guinea pig, and so Sister Adriana volunteered. Luckily for her, the cure was, in fact, finally perfected, and she was reborn and given the name Laxasia the Complete. She kept her mind, she kept her form, and she gained tremendous strength. Laxasia became Simon's bodyguard and right-hand man, and serves as one of the game's final and most difficult bosses, defending the room where Sophia is being held. The rare ergo we get when defeating her, called the Sad Zealot's ergo, has an item description which reads, "The alchemist Adriana was baptized by the elixir, and she became the first whole being. Everything about her was perfect, except the fact that her feelings for one person could not be erased." I don't think this is the alchemist's perspective, that her feelings for Simon were imperfect. I think it's the voice of the narrator commenting on how her feelings for Simon were unearned and her downfall. Even the name of her rare ergo, the Sad Zealot's ergo, paints a picture of a sad and unrequited love. Simon doesn't seem to care for Laxasia at all. I don't think he even has a line acknowledging her in the entire game. Once you defeat Laxasia, you find yourself face to face with Sophia, our blue fairy, in her terrible, half-dead, half-living state. Her soul has mostly split from her body, as she has projected it across Krat to speak with you throughout the game, and she's clearly in a tremendous amount of pain. She brought you here to free her. That doesn't mean letting her out of Arch Abbey. That doesn't mean escorting her back to Hotel Krat. As soon as you see her, it's pretty clear that there's no moving her, no saving her in a traditional sense. What she's brought you here to do is set her free by mercy killing her. This is one of those things that, at a glance, feels like a radical departure from the original story. Maybe even, at first, a little edgelordy. What if, like, Pinocchio had to kill the blue fairy, man? Again, though, upon looking at the original text, this isn't as radical of a departure from the story as it might initially seem. The blue fairy is heavily associated with death and mortality throughout the game, and even introduced to the story in a half-dead, half-living state. That's not entirely dissimilar to the one we find Sophia in Lies of P. From the book, at this point, a pretty little girl looked out the window. She had blue hair, and her face was as white as a waxen image. Her eyes were closed, and her hands were crossed on her chest. Without moving her lips at all, she said in a tiny, feeble voice that seemed to come from the afterworld, "No one lives in this house. Everyone is dead." "At least you could open the door for me," shouted Pinocchio, weeping and pleading for her help. "I'm dead too." "Dead? Then what are you doing there at the window?" "I'm waiting for my coffin to come take me away." As soon as she had said these words, the little girl disappeared, and the window closed without a sound. This character of the blue-haired girl, who will later become the Blue Fairy, was introduced in Chapter 15 of Pinocchio, as he is fleeing from the fox and the cat who intend to hang him from an oak tree. As a reminder, this was the final chapter of the original serials, the original ending of the story of Pinocchio. This character of the blue-haired girl, an embodiment of mortality, is introduced just 2 pages before the original ending of the story. When the story continues, Collodi reimagines her as having been a fairy in disguise, who summons a falcon and the poodle Medoro to go cut Pinocchio down from the tree and bring him to her. Then she summons the doctors we've already discussed, then the Undertaker rabbits we have likewise already discussed, and so on. The fairy's association with death does not stop here, though. Twice in the story following this, the fairy is presented as either having died or being terminally ill because she believes she has been abandoned by Pinocchio after taking him in. First, in Chapter 23, when Pinocchio returns to the fairy's house after being imprisoned for 4 months by the gorilla judge, he finds an epitaph reading, "Here lies the blue-haired little girl who died of grief for having been abandoned by her little brother, Pinocchio." Eventually, the Blue Fairy returns, now having transformed from a young girl into a fully grown woman and shifting her role from Pinocchio's big sister to his mother. Much later, in the final chapter, after Pinocchio abandons the fairy to go live in the land of toys, and then ends up as a donkey, and then ultimately ends up back in his puppet body, but swallowed by the terrible dogfish, when he returns home with his father to where the story began, he finds that the fairy has once again fallen terribly ill, and this time has lost all of her money as well. This time, Pinocchio finally applies himself, shakes off the laziness that has come to define his character up to this point, and works to provide for his father, Geppetto, and his mother, the fairy. At the end of the story, he sees the fairy one last time in a dream, where she forgives all of his bad behavior because he has demonstrated a new maturity, and so she transforms him into a real boy. The point I am making is that while many adaptations, like the Disney version, lose this element, the Blue Fairy is a character very tied to mortality. She's a character who constantly exists in the state of both being alive and dead at the same time. And so this adaptation of her in the form of Sophia is more accurate to the original story than it initially seems. Of course, the element of a mercy killing is invented for the game. Pinocchio doesn't have to take the Blue Fairy off of life support in the book. This is one of the final decisions in the game, and the first of 2 decisions that are undoubtedly framed as the most important by the game. When I said before that Gemini is not framed as P's conscience, but as his companion, this is perhaps the best example of that. When faced with the decision whether to kill Sophia or keep her alive, Gemini does not tell you what the right answer is. He says he has no idea which decision you should make. The game does have an opinion on what the right answer is, though. The game frames the decision to kill Sophia as the moral thing to do. If you choose to let Sophia live here, you are locking yourself out of the true ending. Letting Sophia suffer as Simon's puppet is, in the opinion of the game, inexcusable, inhuman. If you choose to kill her, and you raise your humanity throughout the game to its highest level, then when you choose to kill her, P goes through a transformation. His hair turns from black to gray. This is the signifier that you are on the path to the true ending. If your hair doesn't turn gray here, then you haven't raised your humanity score high enough to get that true ending, and will just have to play through the game again if you want to see it. So how do you raise your humanity in the game? How do you make P a real boy? A true resurrection of Carlo's ego, and not just a mindless puppet? To answer that, we're going to have to look broadly at the decisions the game faces you with. This game is called Lies of P for a reason. The game's most major theme is lying. Why do we lie, and is lying always wrong? First, I should point out, just for clarity, that from what I can tell, humanity is a term coined by the game's fandom. I don't believe the term is ever used to describe the points you're building in order to get P's hair to turn gray, claim the golden lie weapon, and get the true ending. But since no term is used directly, this is a hidden stat, it's what the fanbase have settled on. One of the most interesting and perhaps unexpected things about Lies of P is that it does not condemn lies. Obviously, I don't think the point of Lies of P is that lies are always good and truth is always bad. That would be an insane position to take. I would say that should go without saying, but I've been around the YouTube block before, so I know how that goes. However, because Pinocchio is a story about an outsider to the human condition learning to be human, it questions why Pinocchio's dishonesty is so often in adaptations portrayed as fundamentally opposed to being human. For example, in the Disney version, Pinocchio's lying is portrayed as something that pushes him away from humanity, emphasizes and makes more apparent his nature as a puppet. This positions lying as a fundamentally inhuman act, but that doesn't hold up to scrutiny at all. An inanimate object, in real life, can't lie. It can't misrepresent itself. Instead, Lies of P says that lying is a part of being human, a part of being alive. It also argues that lying can be a kindness if it's done for the right reasons. Way back, 70 years ago, at the beginning of this video, I said that it's not hard to imagine a lesser version of Lies of P where you get the good ending by always telling the truth, and the bad ending by always lying, and some ending in the middle if you do a mix of the two. A Paragon Renegade meter type of thing. A karma system that has fallen further and further out of fashion as games have progressed and continued to tell more complicated stories. Most guides online tell you that if you want to get the true ending, you need to always lie. I will say from personal experience, that is not true. I have tested it specifically for the purposes of this video. There are more points available than you need to cap your humanity score, so if you tell the truth once or twice, you won't necessarily be locked out of the true ending for it. Instead, if you want to get the best ending of Lies of P, what P needs to do is not tell the truth, nor, strictly speaking, lie. He needs to assert his humanity. He is not bound by the Grand Covenant. He's the only puppet who doesn't have the laws of robotics imprinted on his heart. And if he is going to become human, then he needs to break the rules of being a puppet. Toward the middle of the game, Lady Antonia, who is dying from the petrification disease, will see the hard stone scales creep up along her face. She'll gaze at a portrait of herself from her glory days and ask if she still retains any of that beauty from her youth. This is presented as a chance to tell the truth, that none of her beauty remains, or tell a lie, that you can still see that beauty. The truth is a cruel option here. To tell a sick old woman that you think her age and her disease have made her hideous, while the lie is an act of compassion, of kindness. Early on in the game's second chapter, we can find a woman suffering from the petrification disease, weeping at the loss of her baby. We can agree to find her baby for her at Krat's town hall, but when we do, we find that everyone there has been slaughtered by puppets. Instead, we give her a doll we find there, but she still sees it as her baby. The woman's disease has made her lose her mind. We can tell her the truth, that it's just a doll and her child is probably dead, or lie and tell her that it's a cute baby. Lying is, again, in this case, an act of compassion. After Rosa Isabelle Street, Polendina, Lady Antonia's servant, will ask to speak to us. This is where he reveals to us that he has an awakened ego and that he is in love with Antonia. Not fully understanding the nature of his own awakened ego, he asks whether you've ever seen this happen before. And we can lie to him, tell him that we have, and give him the wedding ring we found earlier at Rosa Isabelle Street, or tell him the truth, that we've never heard of such a thing happening. Again, this is a kindness, as Polendina is confiding in us, and we have chosen to validate his own feelings, his own humanity. This doesn't line up perfectly. Not every lie you can tell is an act of kindness. For example, when we first meet the imposter Alidoro, he asks us if we know of a safe place he can head to. We can either tell him the truth, Hotel Krat, or lie and send him straight into danger in Vanini Works. In this case, though, it's a bit muddled. There's enough about the imposter Alidoro right from the start that you might already be suspicious of him, and Geppetto earlier warned us to be wary of strangers, in which case refusing to send him to your friends at the hotel could be interpreted as defending your friends. Very human act. The idea of there being lies that are not immoral to tell is actually rooted, once again, in an idea from the book. Pinocchio's nose growing when he tells a lie is, without a doubt, the most well-recognized part of the story. But it may surprise you to hear that in the actual story, it's not exactly the case. Pinocchio's nose growing is an element from nearly the beginning of the story, but in the original run, it has no connection with his dishonesty. The first reference to Pinocchio's nose growing occurs in the book's third chapter, while Geppetto is carving Pinocchio from an animate log. As Geppetto tries to make the puppet's nose, the more he tries to shorten it, the longer it grows, foreshadowing the puppet's mischievous nature. The second time Pinocchio's nose grows, in Chapter 5, it grows from hunger, after Pinocchio has gotten Geppetto temporarily thrown in jail and finds himself without anything to eat. It's not until the second run of serials, all the way in Chapter 17, that a connection is drawn between Pinocchio's nose growing and his telling lies, when he lies to the Blue Fairy and says he swallowed his remaining 4 gold coins by mistake while taking some medicine she had given him. From the book, "Why are you laughing?" the puppet asked her, all confused and concerned about that nose of his that was growing so fast you could see it happening before your eyes. "I'm laughing about the lie you told." "How do you know I told a lie?" "My dear boy, you can recognize lies right away, because there are 2 kinds. There are lies that have short legs and lies that have a long nose. Yours happens to be of the kind that has a long nose." The part about lies with short legs is a reference to an existing Italian colloquialism, which essentially means that lies can't go very far without being exposed. But the part about lies with long noses is believed to be an expression invented by Collodi for the story. Even once the connection between Pinocchio's lying and his nose growing is firmly established, his nose does not always grow when he lies throughout the rest of the story. As one example, in Chapter 29, after Pinocchio escapes from the green fisherman who was trying to eat him, he finds himself naked and covered head to toe in flour, so thick it looks like he's covered in plaster. At this point, he runs into an old man and lies to him repeatedly. The only lie here that makes his nose grow, however, is when he said that he's heard of the boy Pinocchio and that he's a good and well-behaved little boy. When he lies about why he's completely white, says he leaned against a wall that had been whitewashed, and when he lies about where his clothes have gone, saying he ran into thieves that stripped him and stole his clothes, his nose does not grow. It is as if Collodi is saying that these lies are permissible, because they are made out of embarrassment instead of selfishness or pride. More importantly for our purposes, in the book's final chapter, when Pinocchio and Geppetto have escaped from the mouth of the terrible dogfish and find themselves stranded in the middle of the ocean, Pinocchio lies to his father, telling him he can see the shore ahead, when Geppetto panics that the two of them are going to drown. This lie doesn't make his nose grow either, presumably because it is not a lie told with selfish intention, but to reassure his father. By framing most of the lies in the game as ones of compassion, kindness, or humanity, Lies of P takes this examination of good lies and bad lies to its logical extreme. Another example of a lie in the game which I find interesting is when you listen to that message I discussed earlier, which reveals that Geppetto is the one behind the puppet frenzy. After you hear this, Vanini will ask you what you heard, what the name of the one behind the puppet frenzy is. You can tell him it's Geppetto, or you can lie and say you didn't hear. Of course, you gain humanity for lying to him. I don't think the game is framing your lie as the right thing or the ethical thing to do here. The logical and moral thing to do would be to immediately tell Vanini, one of your greatest allies, what you heard. However, Geppetto is P's father, and so if we interpret P as having emotions, as having an attachment to his father, then I don't think it's hard to understand why he'd deny it after hearing this major bombshell. It's not about what the right thing to do is. It's about what the human thing to do is. And in a game about Pinocchio, about what it means to become human, that's a powerful idea. Ultimately, Lies of P says that lying, especially when it's done for the right reasons and not to harm others, is human. Pinocchio wants to become a real boy, and real boys lie sometimes. It's a very interesting perspective to take when reinterpreting Pinocchio for a modern audience, and it feels to me more thoughtful and considerate of the actual themes of the book than most other adaptations. P does not only gain humanity from lying, however. It's important to note that sometimes you receive humanity from telling the truth, as well. Late in the game, Alidoro the Hound is revealed to be an imposter. This is tied into Eugenie's quest, and ultimately the fake Alidoro reveals to you that the real Alidoro was her brother. You can choose to lie to Eugenie when she asks you about the fraud and the real Alidoro, or you can choose to tell her the truth, that the real Alidoro, now dead, was her brother. Initially, this will not net you any humanity points, but if you return to her later, after she's had time to process, you will gain humanity for telling her the truth. It may hurt her, it may not be a kindness in the moment, but it's important to tell her who her brother was. It's the right thing to do, and the game communicates that mechanically. There are plenty of other ways of asserting P's humanity that have nothing to do with lying or telling the truth. One of the first examples of this comes when you visit St. Frangelico Cathedral. It's easy to miss, but there's an altar there which says pilgrims come to pray at it. Once you've learned the pray gesture, if you return to this altar and pray at it, you'll earn some humanity. You also gain humanity if you choose to kill the imposter Alidoro at the end of the game, as being unable to kill humans is one of the laws that's imprinted on every puppet at creation. Unless it's overwritten by a previous law, or it's an act of self-defense, a puppet cannot kill a human, and so by killing Alidoro, you are asserting that you are more than a puppet. Throughout the game, one of the collectibles you can find are records, which can be played on a phonograph in Hotel Krat to listen to some of the excellent songs off of Lies of P's soundtrack. If you stand and listen to the music, for each record you listen to, you earn some humanity. Appreciating music is something only a human would do, not a robot. After you complete the Grand Exhibition level of the game, if you return to Hotel Krat, Polendina will tell you that Antonia's illness is getting worse. He asks you to speak to Giangio about a potential cure. Giangio tells you that he's able to make a cure from the gold coin fruit that will alleviate Antonia's symptoms, but which will cause her to die much more quickly. It's worth noting, I don't think this is the cure that the alchemists are working on, as Giangio's version seems to be more of a remedy to treat the symptoms rather than the disease. In some foreshadowing for the choice you end up making regarding Sophia later on, you have to choose whether to give Antonia the cure, give her back her strength and her life, but ultimately condemning her to a much faster death, or to withhold the cure from her, leaving her alive for longer, but in tremendous pain. It should not surprise you, given how the choice about Sophia is framed later on, that the game considers the good choice, the human choice, to be giving Antonia the cure, giving her her life back, if only for a short time. Finally, my favorite example of a way you gain humanity consistently throughout the game is by solving Arlecchino's riddles. I joked earlier about how weird it is that the Riddler sometimes calls you in this game, and it is weird, but they actually use Arlecchino, the King of Riddles, in a really clever way. Arlecchino calls you 5 times throughout the game, and asks you to solve riddles. Each of the riddles you solve correctly earns you humanity points. This is clever because riddles require creative thinking. They require you to look at the words presented to you and understand what is meant, not what is being said. The first riddle given, for example, is a variation on one of the most well-known riddles out there. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night? The answer is man. As a baby, you crawl on all 4s, in the prime of your life you walk upright, and when you reach old age, you walk with a cane. This is not the sort of thinking a robot, a computer, could perform. It requires creative interpretation, not thinking literally about the words being asked. Solving riddles is human. This is a nitpick, I will be the first to acknowledge that, but I actually don't like Arlecchino's 3rd riddle for this reason. The riddle is, what cannot be used before it breaks, and the correct answer is an egg. That's the only one of his riddles that is solved through literal interpretation. You cannot use an egg until you break it. The others all require abstract interpretation of what's being asked, or, for the final riddles, test P's developing humanity and guilt, as well as the player's understanding of what's actually going on in the game's story. As P gains humanity throughout the game, there are a few ways you can tell how P is changing. The first is the message that plays when you gain humanity. At the start of the game, it will say, your springs are reacting, which sounds very ominous the first time you lie if you're expecting this to be a more conventional story, where lying is strictly bad and truth is strictly good. Later, after gaining enough humanity, the message will change to, the ergo is whispering. Then, you feel warmth. And finally, if you've gained enough humanity to get the true ending, your heart is pounding. If you've gained sufficient humanity, then when you defeat Romeo at the end of Chapter 6, the next time you talk to Sophia, she will say that P is changing, becoming more than a puppet, and a cutscene will play where his hair grows long. This is more foreshadowing surrounding the Sophia choice near the end of the game, where P's hair turns gray. There's a piano in Hotel Krat near Lady Antonia. At first, P can't play it at all, but as you gradually gain humanity, he grows more and more skilled at the piano. Once again, this draws a direct line between music and the experience of being human. There's also a cat in Hotel Krat, and initially the cat will hiss and claw at P if you try to pet it, but it gradually warms up to him as he becomes more human. The cat is based on the game director's own pet cat, which is pretty cute. Now that we understand the purpose lies serve in Lies of P's narrative, what Lies of P's perspective on lying and telling the truth is, and how it's less clear-cut than you might expect, we can start talking about the climax of the game. We can talk about Simon Manus, what his plan is, and some of the game's more out-there twists. We can also start talking about Geppetto and the 3 possible endings of the game. Let's start off by talking about Simon Manus, the main antagonist for most of the game. So what's going on with Simon and with the alchemists? Let's start by going back to St. Frangelico Cathedral and Archbishop Andreas. It's worth asking what sort of religion St. Frangelico practiced before it fell. The iconography is recognizably Christian, more specifically Catholic, but much like Bloodborne, it's only using the iconography here, and the religion is not a real one. The cathedral is named for St. Frangelico. St. Frangelico is the founder of the religion, who long ago, well before the events of the game, well before the alchemists discovered Krat, had an encounter with a one-winged angel. Not Sephiroth, a literal angel. We see iconography of this one-winged angel throughout St. Frangelico, and hear references to it in several lore notes. This one-winged angel is the primary deity of the religion practiced in Krat. When Archbishop Andreas, who was hailed by the people as a reincarnation of St. Frangelico, was transformed into a carcass, we see that he has developed a wing on one arm. And if we listen to his dialogue, he even calls himself a one-winged angel. In his madness, it seems he believes himself to be a physical incarnation of his god. The alchemists, under Simon Manus, seem to have formed their own doctrine as a splinter from this existing religion in Krat. Although under Valentinus they were most likely just a scientific organization, they've changed into an outright cult by the events of the game. Even their headquarters, the final level of the game, is called an abbey. We can find books of doctrine specifically created by Simon, called So Says Pistris, throughout the Arch-Abbey. Simon's full name is Simon Pistris Manus, which we learn from a diary available just before the game's penultimate boss fight. The So Said Pistris lore books, written by Adriana, who would later become Laxasha, but dictated by Simon, read, I, Adriana, recorded for the brothers and sisters, praise Pistris, the one who will swallow even God. Listen, my brothers and sisters, I, Pistris, shall tell you about the world's secret. In the beginning, it was a wish. It had to be a wish. It's the only paradise perishable humans can have. For thousands of years, humans' wishes perished, but one reached a star. That was a miracle. More so because that star was a very good one. The star answered the humans and descended to Earth. Then everything began. Listen, my brothers and sisters. I, Pistris, shall tell you about ancient secrets. A star that was curious about humans pretended to be human, then became one. The humans saw its splendor and called it an angel. Although its form was the same, its substance was different. The undying substance, the breath of metal that lives forever. That is the reason humans wished for an angel. The angel gladly shared immortality with humans, but that blessing wasn't for everyone. Listen, my brothers and sisters. I, Pistris, shall tell you about true eternal life. An angel's gift was something humans dare not enjoy. Many humans died with hope in their hearts, and the ones who lived harbored rage instead of death. Eventually, humans destroyed and burned their hope on their own. This is how the angel became the god torn to death. But today, there are definitely those who survived with the blessing. They, the immortal ones, still walk around and wish for the resurrection of God. I clearly told the truth I witnessed. Now you shall all follow this path. There's a lot to unpack there. This doctrine serves a practical purpose. It's a propaganda line, a way Simon was able to explain the petrification disease and even the horribly mutated carcasses away as divine punishment. How immortality warps the unworthy. The star being referred to here is most likely the Krat deposit underneath Krat. What do we know about Krat other than that it can be used to crystallize ergo and that the deposit is constantly growing? Well, for that, we need to look at the document that confirms to us that Krat is growing, well before we see this happen practically. It's found back in the Grand Exhibition. It is called Order of Krat Report and reads, no one knows when the inorganic cluster structure called Krat sank its roots into Krat. The first documented record is 600 years ago, when there was a ground collapse in the west of Krat. The people who collected the bodies of the farmers and mules who died found unknown minerals and ruins at the bottom of the pit, but they didn't know their value at the time. Even now, Crowd is growing. It's early to hypothesize, but I wonder if Crowd is some mineral life that consumes ergo. How else can we explain that abnormal growth? Or a ruin's defense system that reacts to anomalies? Maybe. The ruins were veiled in secrecy for too long. We still don't know much about those cursed ruins. Crowd is still growing. We need a solution. The confirmation that it's been there for at least 600 years, as well as Simon's doctrine referring to it as a star, is why I believe it to be a meteorite which fell to Earth in the distant past. Simon's doctrine, which is certainly heretical to the beliefs of St. Frangelico's congregation, reframes the one-winged angel which St. Frangelico met as some sort of manifestation of the Crowd deposit in a humanoid form. The undying substance, the breath of metal that lives forever, refers to ergo. Ergo is a crystallized form of the soul, granted by the existence of Crowd, which can be used to put humans into eternal metal bodies. The angel gladly shared immortality with humans, but that blessing wasn't for everyone. An angel's gift was something humans dare not enjoy. Many humans died with hope in their hearts, and the ones who lived harbored rage instead of death. To me, that sounds like poetic language to describe the petrification disease and the carcasses which were made by the alchemists. What all of this is saying is that the Crowd deposit is alive. It's not just a mineral deposit the alchemists discovered, it is an alien life form, powerful enough that they worshipped it as a god. It's also interesting to compare Crowd, a mineral life form, a living creature made of rock, to the petrification disease, which seems to be caused by exposure to ergo, which is Crowd. If we look at this from the perspective of Simon's doctrine, is the petrification disease an attempt by the Crowd life form to communicate with humans, to transform them into a shape it recognizes, the same way it once transformed itself into a human shape? Probably not, because of an item description we'll get to in a moment that indicates that the Crowd life form is not actively conscious or aware during the events of the game, but it's not hard to see how Simon would have made the leaps required to get to such a belief. This brings us back to the Arm of God, that relic which Andreas stole away from the alchemists. The alchemists believe it to be literally the arm of their god, the arm of the one-winged angel. There's a lore note in the Cathedral that confirms that Andreas saw this as heresy, as the height of hubris for the alchemists to describe their relic as a part of the angel. When we defeat Simon's boss fight, we actually get the Arm of God as a key item. The item description reads, "It is a mysterious relic that the alchemists treated as a sacred object." The alchemists believed that there was once a god who was ripped to shreds trying to give immortal life to the humans he so loved, and they wanted to revive him. However, the god who was deep in sleep never answered their prayers. That's cosmic horror as hell, this idea of humans worshipping a god that's not conscious or even aware of their existence, slowly corrupting an entire city merely through its presence beneath it. At this point, you may realize that we're in completely original territory. None of this has anything to do with the original story of Pinocchio. But did you spot it? Did you see how they got here from Pinocchio? Did you see what they did here? Let me reread a line from Simon's doctrine. "In the beginning, it was a wish. It had to be a wish. It's the only paradise perishable humans can have. For thousands of years, humans' wishes perished, but one reached a star." This is all a veiled reference to the Disney movie, When You Wish Upon a Star, as cosmic horror. When I realized this, I lost my mind laughing. Speaking of things being loosely taken from other versions of the story, Simon himself is, without a doubt, the weirdest interpretation of a character in the entire game. Your first time through Lies of P, it seems like the game is missing an adaptation of one of the most memorable moments in Pinocchio, that being the terrible dogfish, adapted in the Disney version as Monstro, a sea monster who swallows Geppetto. This serves as Pinocchio's final trial by fire, and showing the maturity and courage to rescue his father from the guts of the beast is the turning point for his character that eventually lets him become a real boy. It's the climax of the entire story. There is no straightforward adaptation of the dogfish in Lies of P. The closest thing we get is the submarine we use to reach the island of alchemists, the Pistrus, which has a shark face painted on it. As a reminder, dogfish is the Italian word for shark, so clearly this submarine is our Monstro, right? It's a pretty underwhelming way to adapt a major moment of the story since it's only on screen for a few seconds. Take note of the name of the submarine, though. The Pistrus. Where else have we heard that name? Simon Pistrus Manus. Sure enough, it turns out Pistrus is actually the Latin word for sea monster. Simon, the main antagonist of most of the game, is our stand-in for the dogfish, not the submarine. If we think about his role in the story's final act, this follows. He is the one who captures Geppetto, the one Pinocchio has to save his father from at the end. It is the weirdest adaptation of anything in this game, but there's not a doubt in my mind that it's deliberate. That said, this is loose enough that what they were doing went over a lot of players' heads, myself included, and just because the connection is there doesn't mean it's a home run. If no one recognized your version of one of the most iconic parts of the original story, then it seems like a misstep to me. At time of writing, there are currently 2 images available showing off Lies of P's upcoming DLC. Both images seem water-themed, with one set in what looks like some sort of giant turbine, and the other set on a ship. It's not confirmed what these DLCs will involve at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if they took a stab at a more direct adaptation of the dogfish section of the original story. I've also seen some people online float the idea of a Peter Pan-themed DLC, since the franchise seems like it's just going to keep working its way through public domain works. Maybe, that could be cool. There's not enough to go on for me to feel capable of making an educated guess yet, though. So now that we understand what the alchemists believe, why they believe the petrification disease to be the growing pains of the evolution of humanity, what is Simon's ultimate plan? His plan is spelled out in the note we find immediately before his boss fight, Simon Manus's confession. This reads, "A father is like God to his son. Even I, Simon, was no different in my youth. But the one who created me was no normal human. You're a failure too. The ability to read minds. Being abandoned in front of God meant the world's destruction. From then on, my life existed to make a world without lies. A world where no one betrays you, and there's only truth, even if it's forced. Now, the finale is here. Once the door is open, it can't be closed. For humankind, I, Simon, gave up being human and decided to walk the path of immortality and the truth. My body will be broken and reformed as the god that was torn apart. I leave this record in my last moments as a human. Simon Pistrus Manus." Simon wants to use the arm of God, along with massive amounts of ergo, which he's siphoned from all of the inhabitants of Krat, an entire city's worth of souls, in order to resurrect, make contact with, and become the crowd life form. He needs Sophia for her ability to channel ergo into him. He needs the perfected cure for the petrification disease, because the massive amount of ergo he's absorbing would surely petrify him unless the cure was already perfected. He is trying to become his own god. It almost works, too. The first phase of Simon's boss fight, we just fight him as a big hunchbacked monstrosity, only partway through his transformation. Then, in the phase transition, Simon's back bursts open, his former body being just a chrysalis for his ascended form, and that ascended form makes contact with the crowd life form, the two reaching for each other in a reference to the creation of Adam. But then, before he can finally usher in the world of truth he seeks, you defeat Simon, killing him and foiling his plan. But why did Simon want to do any of this? We now know his goal, but what were his motives? We get more of Simon's backstory by reading the item description for his rare ergo, which reads, "The boy was among those who were made to live an immortal life. However, he was deemed a failure and abandoned, and then he set out on a journey to become a god to prove himself." So, Simon was born to those who were made to live an immortal life? What does that mean? This is where our answers start to, by necessity, get into speculative territory, because this is tied into hooks for future games in this series. The hooks for a larger conspiracy, which it seems the game's sequel is going to explore, are first hidden throughout the game as a part of Arlecchino's quest. Each time you solve one of Arlecchino's riddles, you receive a Trinity key. There's actually two variants of these keys, with similar item descriptions. I'm reading the description for the Chosen One's Trinity key because it's slightly clearer. The Sacred Triangle was some organization's secret mark. Rumor has it that this organization was Krat's true master. This secret organization, the true masters of Krat, cannot be the alchemists. The alchemists are not Krat's secret rulers. They're just Krat's regular rulers. There are 5 keys, each of which opens a hidden Trinity door somewhere in Krat, specifically in chapters 3, 4, 6, 9, and 11. Each door, except for the last one, hides one piece of secret lore written by those who built these sanctums, and a message written by Arlecchino, indicating that you are retracing his own steps through these sanctums. The final door, meanwhile, hides Arlecchino, who has been wired into the same tower that hides Sophia. The important part here is what the books the sanctums were made to house have to say. In the order they appear, they read, 3 create 1. You who opened the door, be one with the great ones. Trust and truth are one. The end of the path of stars will lead to great eternal life. They passed through the door. It's time to understand the true meaning of the 3 pillars. Remember the metal angel. We are simply on a journey to follow his footsteps. So, given the recurring theme of 3, I'm going to refer to this organization as the Trinity, since they're never named in-game. The only other concrete information about the Trinity we get comes at the very end of the game. The very end of the game, in the form of a post-credits scene. If you haven't played the game yet, and you haven't had this spoiled for you, I'm just going to play it so you can have the experience for yourself.
I have a final report on the Krat experiment.
You certainly took your time, Paracelsus. Your findings?
I think we have a new brother. A new type of humanity, so to speak.
There are many forms of eternal life.
It's intriguing, and worth further observation.
Noted. And we'll have to get his arm back anyway.
I'm counting on it. Expect another report at the next meeting. Paracelsus returning. Ah, and when I return, I will find her. For sure. Another key of ours. Dorothy.
So, Giangio, the bit character, the seemingly harmless alchemist who's helping you in exchange for gold-coined fruits, is actually Paracelsus, a member of the Trinity. He's an immortal. The Trinity are a group of immortals, and everything that's happened in the game has secretly just been a part of the Krat experiment, an effort by the Trinity to birth a new immortal being. We haven't gotten there yet, but regardless of which of the game's 3 endings you get, a new immortal being is born. It's just the identity of that being that changes. So this ending makes sense no matter what choices you make in the game. This is also why we know the next game will likely be Wizard of Oz themed, as it seems Giangio is not only going to retrieve the arm of God you took from Simon, but he's now out to find Dorothy, who has been a thorn in the side of his organization for some time. After the credits roll, if we return to the spot where Giangio once was, we find he's left a note behind for us to read, the Letter of the Eternal. I had a good time. It's amazing to see a new brother being born. I hope to meet you again sometime on the eternal line of time. Signed, P.P. Philippus Paracelsus, by the way, was a real person, unlike most of the other characters in the game. He was a real 16th century physician and, yes, alchemist. So putting all of this together, Simon is the child of a member of the Trinity. I think it's reasonable to speculate that Paracelsus was specifically his father, as Paracelsus is not only a member of the Trinity, but also seems to be a member of the alchemists, so that would explain Simon's association with both groups. But whether Simon's parent was Paracelsus or another member of the group isn't that important. Simon was seen as a failure, though, unfit to join the ranks of these Eternals, and so was outcast from the Trinity. Fueled by this, he sought a means for eternal life to spite them, and prove his worth. This group of people who live forever and seek to resurrect the metal angel are also who Simon is referring to at the end of the So Said Pistris lore notes, which is why Giangio intends to get the Arm of God back in the post-credits stinger. This is another part that gets a little messy for me, and it's possible that either DLC or the sequel will shed more light on it, but being outcast was viewed by Simon as a betrayal, and this betrayal, or perhaps the secretive nature of the Trinity, fostered a pathological hatred of lies. When Simon discovered that Ergo could be used by listeners to read the minds and memories of others, he viewed it as a way to strip lies from the world. When he becomes a god, he is going to create a world of absolute truth, a world where no one can lie to anyone else, where everyone will know the hearts of each other, a place without any secrets at all. In a simpler, more cut-and-dry morality tale, where lying is wrong and truth is good, that could be framed as a heroic motivation. Of course, that would be a much worse story, and if you think about the specifics of a world of absolute concrete truth, it quickly becomes terrible, if not outright paradoxical. Once again, I want to stress, that's not to say Lies of P is positioning truth as immoral. That would be insane. Another character, Medoro, who is portrayed heroically, is also on a search to cut through the lies of Krat and find the truth. He discusses that in his final note we mentioned earlier. Of course, this also highlights Simon's hypocrisy, as most of the lies Medoro needs to cut through are ones being told by the alchemists, by Simon. We've already discussed Lies of P's philosophy that lying is a part of being human, and can be done out of compassion and kindness. Simon's vision of a world of truth not only assumes that truth is always objective, but does not include any room for compassion. His is a world where you would look at Antonia and tell her that she's hideous. A world where you would tell Polendina that his feelings aren't real. A world where you would tell a sick woman that her baby is just a doll. This is also why it's important that some of the truths we've been able to tell throughout the game are later exposed to be false. We would have told Julian the gentleman that his wife, the puppet, said nothing. Later, we would find out we were wrong. This is why Simon's world of absolute truths is paradoxical. The world is changing and evolving, and individual people can only ever see a tiny slice of it at a time. This quite deliberately positions Simon as something of a dark mirror to P. Simon lets his quest for the truth turn him into a monster, while P uses lying to become human. That's not the only way the two are paralleled, however. Simon's confession opens with the line, "A father is like God to his son." Both are seeking the approval and recognition of their fathers. Simon let that quest for recognition motivate him into committing evil acts. He is a cautionary tale for P and for the player not to blindly be someone else's puppet. In his final moments, Simon is resigned to his fate and says,
"It's fine if I'm gone. But be warned. Watch out for Geppetto."
Once you defeat Simon, you are taken to the final room of the game, at the heart of the tower you've spent the level climbing. There, you meet Geppetto, who has a final request for P, his heart. Part of what makes P different from other puppets is the special heart designed for him by Geppetto, the unfortunately named P organ. Throughout the entire game, that P organ has been absorbing ergo, growing stronger and stronger, and bringing P closer and closer to his humanity. When you meet Geppetto after defeating Simon, he gives P one final request, and the final choice of the game. Geppetto requests P surrender his heart, the P organ, saying that with it, the arm of God, and all of the ergo you've collected through the game, he'll be able to bring you back to life, turn you into a real boy. Like the choice whether to let Sophia live or end her suffering, this is a choice which directly determines which ending of the game you'll get. If you accept his request, you get the game's first ending, which is absolutely the bad ending of the game. Amusingly, this bad ending is titled Real Boy. They all lived happily ever after. In the ending, Geppetto and P embrace before Geppetto reaches into P's chest and pulls out his mechanical heart. In P's last moments, we see Geppetto bringing the heart to a trunk and see a hand reaching out of it. The body in the trunk is the body of his son, his true flesh and blood son, Carlo. The loss of Carlo broke Geppetto in mind and spirit. He not only grew to resent the alchemists, but knowing the true nature of ergo, became obsessed with bringing his son back to life. Geppetto's first attempt to revive his son resulted in a boss we'll talk about in a moment, the Nameless Puppet. This is the hand we see reaching out of the trunk in the Real Boy ending, a puppet made out of Carlo's dead body rather than steel. When we defeat the Nameless Puppet and get its rare ergo, the item description reads, "The Nameless Puppet was the first puppet made by the old man that was mounted with a P organ." Its ergo efficiency was not just unremarkable, it was destructive. Thus, the Nameless Puppet was not chosen for the boy's body and sealed away. So, directly using Carlo's body as the vessel for the P organ wouldn't work. It was going to destroy itself, and so was considered a failure. P was his second attempt. He needed a sturdier body to contain the P organ with Carlo's ergo within it, and so he created P within a secret workshop in a train car in Krat Central Station, and placed Carlo's heart within him. To truly bring Carlo back to life, the P organ containing Carlo's essence would need to absorb a tremendous amount of ergo, and be put through a crucible in order to awaken. He also knows about the arm of God and needs to use its tremendous power to truly resurrect Carlo. It doesn't seem that Geppetto was able to fully complete his masterpiece, P, however. Remember that back at the beginning of the game, as in many adaptations of Pinocchio, Geppetto is not the one to give life to his son. Sophia, our blue fairy, gives him that initial spark of life. I view this failure on Geppetto's part, this inability to make the perfect puppet host for his son's ergo, as the reason Geppetto's plan changed, the reason why he created Romeo and started the puppet frenzy. If he couldn't get P working, if he couldn't bring his son back, at least he could get revenge on Simon by using his puppets to cut off Simon's ergo supply by killing everyone in the city. His plans immediately change when he's rescued by P late in Chapter 2.
Finally, we meet, son.
P is active, and suddenly, resurrecting Carlo is back on the table. The P organ is going to need to absorb a tremendous amount of ergo in order for the plan to work, and so what better way of doing that than to lead P on a journey to kill the king of puppets, which he himself created. When you fight Romeo, he understands that he's been betrayed by Geppetto. On your second playthrough, when you can understand what the puppets are saying, he apologizes about needing to kill you, recognizing you as his friend Carlo, but saying that your death is the only thing that can make this stop. This is also, I think, what that cutscene when the King of Puppets is introduced was about. It's not telling you that you were once Carlo's heart placed inside a puppet's body, but rather it's a warning that Geppetto is going to take your heart to put it back inside the nameless puppet. This is why the King of Puppets extends a hand to you. He's trying to get you on his side. This is why it's a face of sadness, not anger, when you refuse him. I don't think it's a big surprise when Geppetto has his villain turn at the last moment. First of all, he's voiced by the same guy who voiced Margit the Fell Omen in Elden Ring, and he reads every line with a sinister gravitas throughout the entire game. Geppetto is a bad person. Before Carlo died, he was already a bad person. He knew what Ergo was, and he still cooperated with the alchemists to use it to fuel puppets. He neglected his son, sending him off to boarding school so he wouldn't need to think about him. This version of Geppetto is manipulative, controlling, and above all else, possessive. In hindsight, I think one of the most telling things about Geppetto's truly sinister nature is how he talks to P. He calls P his son, but always describes him as precious to me. That's how you talk about an item, an object. P is important to Geppetto because he's a part of his plan, but there's no love there, the same way he never showed any love for Carlo. Make no mistake, Geppetto does not deserve sympathy. If he wanted to oppose the alchemists more directly, he could have commanded the puppets to do anything, to storm the alchemists' island before they were as strong as we see them in the game. Instead, he had them murder the entire city. Human lives mean nothing to him, and we can see that further in the actual ending. After P dies and we fade to black, we see Geppetto and his true son, Carlo, reunited at the Hotel Krat. Geppetto wants to build a perfectly ordered world for his son, the perfect world. The version of Carlo brought back by Geppetto specifically has all of Carlo's memories, but not his personality. If we refuse Geppetto for the other two endings of the game, then Geppetto even comments that you are a failure, that you've got Carlo's personality, a personality he could never fully control, instead of his memories. He calls Carlo a mischievous boy and sees that you take after him. This is him tipping his hand and telling us what he values, what he sees his son as. The version of Carlo that's brought back under Geppetto's spell is completely at the control of his father. He is flesh and blood, but he is more Geppetto's puppet than P ever was. Now that his son is back, Geppetto has decided that Krat must become a perfect city for the two of them, and that anyone else living gets in the way of that. Carlo has slaughtered all the residents of the hotel. We see the bodies of Vanini and Eugenie in the entryway as Geppetto smiles, his son now brought back to him. In the post-game of this ending, if we load our game back up after beating it, we are now playing as Carlo. If you return to Geppetto's office in this version of the post-game, you can find a letter left for you by Geppetto, talking about getting Krat under control, warning you that because you are partially made from the arm of God, you have a sensitivity to Ergo, and finally ending, no matter what others say, you're my son. No one will be in our way anymore. I'll rebuild Krat for you. Until then, please stay safe in the hotel. Your father, who cares about you more than anyone. In this ending, all of the NPCs have been replaced by soulless puppet copies of themselves, who simply greet Carlo and say they're at his service. A perfectly ordered city for Geppetto and Carlo to live together forever. There's an irony here, though, something which Geppetto has not realized or accepted. We know puppets don't remain soulless machines forever. Eventually, all of these puppets will awaken to their own egos, and then Krat will essentially be the same as it ever was. All of Geppetto's violence for nothing. Perhaps then he'll scrap them all and start over and over and over. The Carlo we hear about through the course of the game was not a monster, not a psychopath who would willingly kill Vanini and Eugenie, and so on, just because his father told him to. In fact, the Carlo we hear about had grown to resent his father for being so absent and cold towards him, abandoning him and sending him away to boarding school instead of being a loving presence. Geppetto doesn't want his son back, doesn't want Carlo back. He wants an idealized, perfect version of his son back. A version of his son with continuity of experience, all of Carlo's memories returned to him, but not his personality. He wants the perfect son, perfectly controlled, perfectly obedient to him. Not a son, but a disciple, a worshipper. As Simon said, a father is like God to his son, and that is what Geppetto wants. In this ending, the new brother which Paracelsus refers to is Carlo, awakened as a sort of demigod, but without any humanity, without any soul. This ending is bleak. It's among the most bleak endings I've seen in a Souls-like. The only way you'll get this ending is by doing the same thing Simon was doing, blindly going to any lengths to seek the approval of a father. The game telegraphs that you should not follow Simon's example. Hard. Geppetto does not care about P, does not see him as a son, but as a thing, as a means to an end. He does not deserve P's love or respect. Thankfully, there are 2 more endings to Lies of P. Both require you to refuse to give Geppetto your heart and to fight the true final boss of the game. When you refuse to give Geppetto P's heart, he opens the trunk, the same one we saw him placing P's heart into in the bad ending. He uses a glove to cast puppet strings onto the body in the trunk, bringing it to life. I love the design for this boss. It's so unpleasant, and it once again emphasizes how dark Geppetto got when his son died. This thing is not even recognizable as Carlo. Instead of mourning for his son and respecting his son's body, he desecrated it. Geppetto's son was just another possession to him, just another puppet. After the fight's first phase, we carve the top of his skull off, and the strings are broken. Geppetto loses control of his creation, and we fight it again in a much more difficult second phase, where its movements are almost feral. At the end of the fight, the nameless puppet almost gets the jump on P, almost strikes a destructive final blow when Geppetto steps between the two, taking the killing blow himself instead, and saying that Carlo's heart must not be destroyed. This distracts the nameless puppet just long enough for P to deal a final blow instead. The first of the 2 good endings is titled Free from the Puppet Strings. We see Geppetto die in P's arms. His final words are a condemnation of P.
I know it. You're just a useless puppet.
This is undoubtedly a better ending than the first. You don't become the Antichrist, so that's nice, and Geppetto is not free to do as he wishes with the world, with a demigod of a puppet at his unquestioned command. This ending does feel very abrupt, though, as it cuts off much sooner than the other 2. We can assume that P, now free from Geppetto, goes on to live some sort of life. He was able to assert himself against his father's wishes, and broke free from his puppet strings. If you have done everything correctly, gotten enough humanity to make P into a real boy, a real person, whether his body is made out of flesh or steel, then you get the Rise of P ending. This ending plays out identically until Geppetto is dying in his son's arms. Just as he's about to call P a useless puppet, P sheds a tear. Geppetto sees this, and immediately understands his mistake. Understands that P, though not exactly Carlo reborn, is truly human after all. This time, as Geppetto dies, he says,
I'm sorry, son.
After this, we see P outside, back on the balcony before Simon's boss fight, as a blue butterfly passes. A blue butterfly has represented Sophia's ergo, the fragments of her soul she's used to communicate with you at Stargazers and throughout the game in general. Finally, we see P approaching a doll, a blue-haired doll of a young woman meant to represent Sophia. P uses his awakened powers, both the literal strength he's gained from Ergo, but more importantly, his compassion and humanity, to channel Ergo into the doll, and he brings Sophia back to life before collapsing in her arms, exhausted. Much like the Blue Fairy returns to life in the original story, Sophia is returned to life here in the body of a puppet. In the end, P is a puppet who has become a human, truly awakening to his own ego. And Sophia is a human who has become a puppet, but with more freedom than she ever had in her human life. To underscore this, we get one final letter from Sophia if we return to the hotel in this version of the postgame. The Blue Butterfly's letter reads, "Thank you for giving me a new life. The fact that an Ergo puppet can have a second life and become another kind of human requires more time for people to find out about it. You're the reason we have our freedom. Thank you so much. I'm grateful you freed me from my puppet strings." That's Lies of P, at least for now, until we get that DLC and that sequel which was announced a few months ago. The broad strokes of Lies of P's story aren't hard to understand. My first time through the game, I enjoyed the story, but didn't pay too much attention to it. Lies of P, like the Souls games, has a story that gives you more the more you're willing to put into it. My second time through the game, when I realized I was asking a lot of questions, and then found that those questions had reasonable answers, both rooted in the game itself and in the story of Pinocchio. That's why I wanted to make this video. I think the writing in Lies of P is excellent. I think it's a fascinating adaptation of Pinocchio, and I think it's a pretty interesting story on its own merits too. I hope you've enjoyed falling down this rabbit hole with me. This video was a lot of fun to make. Pinocchio was not a story I really had a personal connection to before making this video. I have no strong feelings about the Disney movie. I like the Guillermo del Toro film, but that's about it. Making this video involved doing a tremendous amount of research into Pinocchio, into Italian culture at the time it was written, and into the history of the story being adapted. Not all of that research made it into the video, which is normal, but what it did result in was me gaining an appreciation for the story that I'd never had before. The original novel is still incredibly entertaining. It's a book written 120 years ago, but like all great works of literature, it holds up well. I hope that beyond just finding out what Lies of P is about, you learned something you didn't know about Pinocchio by watching this video too. If you, like me, were more familiar with adaptations than the original story, I really do encourage you to read the original book. It's not a hard read. I mean, it's a children's book, and it's like 150 pages total. You can read it in an afternoon. But it's a story that I've discovered I think is widely misunderstood and misrepresented by adaptations, and I found a lot of joy in learning about the original story for this video. The developers of Lies of P could have made something worse. Could have made a story that doesn't understand Pinocchio at all and uses the premise as a stunt. Instead, while you wouldn't think it from a glance at the aesthetic of the game, Lies of P oozes with appreciation for the writings of Carlo Collodi and respect for the original story they are adapting. They make changes to the story and are ultimately telling a story that is very different to the original, obviously, but it does feel to me like they examined what was special about the character of Pinocchio and found a way to use that to make a game that is still very strongly connected to the original story. That's impressive and it's worth commending. If you haven't played Lies of P yet, it's a great game with a great story, and I firmly believe it's worth your time. If you've made it this far into the video, then thank you. I know this video was long. I know I make long videos. This was supposed to be a short video that I could turn around quickly. That didn't happen. If you liked this video, it would mean the absolute world to me if you'd consider subscribing for more fever dreams like this in the future, leaving a comment below to say hi, or perhaps most importantly of all, sharing this video with your friends. Special thank you to my patrons and YouTube channel members for helping to support me making insane projects like this one. Strix 2031, Parker Malarkey, Rachel Aurelia, Sir Darkon, William, Cabbage, Emilia Anguiano, Brimstoner, Rekka, Florine, David Duran, Alex Smith, Picayune, Hakan Boyum, Pete Lee, Jake G, Nittend, Shiny Emptyhead, Lucas Craden, That's All, Alex, Bell Mage, Malachi Murphy, and Dunio. If you'd like to get your name read out at the end of future videos, check out patreon.com/Zuldim or click the join button below the video. That'll also get you access to some supporter-exclusive videos, although there isn't one tied to this video specifically, so I don't know. If you like books from the late 1800s, I've got one about the King in Yellow I made last July. Next time, this video was a lot of fun to make, but it also just about killed me, so I need to retreat to my comfort zone for a minute. The next main video, excluding things like shorts, is going to be a long time coming. It'll be the next installment of my series examining Hitman maps in depth, and we'll cover the Miami map of Hitman 2. Until next time, everyone, take care.